Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the regular March 17th meeting of the Santa Monica Planning Commission. Could we have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Fonda Bernardi?
Here.
Commissioner Fresco?
Here.
Commissioner Lambert?
Here.
Commissioner Pastor?
Here.
Commissioner Reese?
Here.
And Chair Landris?
Here. Thank you very much, and we note that Commissioner Raskin has an excused absence. Could we have the Planning Director's report?
Good evening, Commission. Yeah, just
in the last
really quick.
Hours.
Yeah, not a lot has changed in the last 24 hours, so not a lot to report. I did want to just say that we have confirmed with all 7 council members that we will be having a meeting on March 30th, and the housing element discussion will move to that night. But I think we said last night that was likely. It's been confirmed now. So for the commission and everyone interested in this topic, it will be on March 30th for the City Council. That's it for my report. Thank you.
All right. Any questions for David? All right. And here we go with the usual announcements. Please note tonight's procedures for public comment. We accepted oral public comment by phone through the pre-registration system noted on the agenda. Registration for oral comment closed at 3:30 p.m. today, 2 hours ahead of our meeting. If you are a member of the public who registered for public comment, check your email for call-in instructions. They were emailed at the start of this meeting. Written comments received up until noon today have been read by the Commission. Comments received after 12 p.m. today will be considered part of the record of the proceedings, but will not be posted online with the Planning Commission's agenda, might not be reviewed by the Planning Commission, and will not be read aloud during public comment during the meeting. I do want to note and thank staff for the clarity on the agenda page, which hope folks have seen. You will see quite clearly the comments that were received for yesterday's meeting, and then the comments that were received between yesterday's meeting and today's meeting. So if you're looking to catch up, you can just sort of click on the after 12 noon on March 16th button, and you'll see everything for today. Again, the moderator chat function in Blue Jeans is for technical help from administrative staff only. It's not for public comment. The Commission cannot see the chat, and nothing that's entered into that will be forwarded to the Commission or entered into the record. Are there any announcements from Commissioner? Seeing none, we can just sort of keep going here. We have neither minutes nor statements of official action nor public hearings. So we will go straight back into 10A, the housing element update draft concepts. As you all know, but if you're just joining us, we will not recap last night's meeting and a previously on the Planning Commission, but this is the second of 2 nights of discussion on draft concepts for the 6th cycle housing element update. Last night, we heard the staff report, questions of staff from the Commission, and public comment. We will now turn to additional questions of staff from the Commission. We have some new public comment, which we will try to take much, much earlier in the evening, and we will go into Commission discussion and potential recommendations to the City Council. Let me say before we jump into that process that what I propose for us to do in order to keep our thoughts as organized as possible and be as helpful as possible to staff, what I'd like to do is we'll take another round of questions if anyone has any follow-ups. We'll go to the public, and then the first thing we'll do is we'll go through those chapters with small, like if you have small technical points that you want to make on any of the chapters that you didn't get to make because we were kind of limited last night in how we could talk, we'll do those. And then we will circle back and we'll make sure that every commissioner has a full opportunity to speak on whatever they want to speak about for this item. And then we'll have some cross conversation, but we'll go step by step through the document. Then we'll circle back for, bigger, broader comments, and then we'll have a conversation. But I'm hoping we can do that so that staff really gets clarity from us on what we want to put into each piece. I see Commissioner Reese's hand up.
I'm just curious if it makes sense to hear from the public before we start asking questions.
That's fine. I do want to, though, before we hear from the public, for the record, I had asked a question yesterday inviting the staff to give us an update overnight, and there were some questions that had come in from the public. So what I'd like to do is formally ask the question of staff, can you please give us the update that we requested yesterday, responding to the public comment we received yesterday on the suitable sites analysis, or any other questions that commissioners may have posed to you for which you did not have the answers at hand yesterday. If other commissioners want to delay their questions until after the public comment, we certainly could do that, but I would like to get that question out so we can hear from staff before we hear from the public. Go ahead, Jane.
Yeah? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we went through actually the questions that the commission was raising yesterday, and I can maybe just give a brief update on those before I just sort of I actually made a little bit of a mini PowerPoint today, which I'm sure you don't, but it's actually more just to help with your discussion and just, frame really what we need from the commission. And hopefully that just helps clarify, because I know it's a lot of information.
Yeah.
In terms of the questions that the commission raised, there was a question about what the risk levels on page 37 of the existing conditions report mean. We were able to follow up with our contacts at the California Housing Partnership. And I believe it was the high or very high risk levels. They confirmed that it is identified as that because those are covenants that are expiring within the next, Carrie, was it the next 5 to 10 years? Was it 1 to 5 years or 5 to 10 years?
5 and less years.
5 and less, yeah. So it's immediate, and it's covenants that are, or within projects that are not owned by nonprofit entities. So we were able to clarify that, and why there's a distinction between the high and the low. We would note that as part of the housing element, we are required to identify at-risk units, which defines any of those units that with those expiring covenants in the next 10 years. So that would be included in the housing element update anyways. There was a question about pulling, basically the list of all those expiring covenants. So we do have the HUD-assisted list. In terms of all the deed restrictions, again, we do have that information, but it is going to take some time to pull that together. So we don't have all of that, for you tonight, but certainly that can be something we will bring back, information with the draft in June. There was a note about the density bonus table, that little image in there. I think Commissioner Landris, you noted that the increment is actually 1.5% for the low income, and you're right, it's 1.5 and 2.5. So but I think we cleared that piece up. On the COPA ordinance, there was a question about how often it's been used. We are attempting to follow up with staff at City of San Francisco just to understand kind of how that program has folded out given its newness. And we can, share more information about that at future meetings. And I think I don't have updates on the rest of the questions because they're sort of more substantive follow-ups, that we will bring back information on. And if you won't mind just indulging me just for a minute, I just kind of want to reframe, the purpose of what we need the commission to do, if that's helpful for you before we sort of jump into the whole thing. It's really just kind of one slide just to talk through and clarify the purpose. So if I could.
Could I just ask before you do that, one of the questions that I had posed from last night was whether you had a broad response to some of the letters from the public that were raising questions about the strategy, and if you have comments on that you can share as well before we get into the framing of our discussion, that would be helpful.
We definitely can, yeah. Ross, can you go ahead and share the screen? So, before I do have a response to that, I just want to clarify that, the purpose of what we need at this session is we are at a conceptual level. There's been a lot of discussion and comments about, quite frankly, a lot of details. We're sort of in the conditions precedent to jumping into all of those details. So what we really need from the commission is, 2 key pieces: direction needed on where housing sites should be located, and then the sort of how, and the strategies all speak to how to remove impediments to affordable housing production. Like, what are ways that we can get to that point? What we are not asking yet is specific numbers or method of calculation of realistic capacity, how the details of the SSI come together. That is not what is being asked at this moment. We are not talking about specific heights or FARs. We are not talking about specific changes to standards. So again, this is a conceptual level discussion to provide direction on, what we will be bringing back to the commission in the draft. Next slide, Ross. This is a broad response. Next slide. To the comments received on the suitable sites inventory. So it's a clarification that the purpose of the SSI is to identify whether sites can accommodate housing, and it helps the city determine whether there are sufficient adequate sites to accommodate the RHNA by income category. It's important to note that the SSI is not a prediction or a guarantee of the future, nor does it obligate any one property owner identified on that inventory to do anything. Owners are making individual decisions about this all the time. So we want to just clarify, that particular purpose, and where we are in terms of the process is identifying the qualities of properties that have redeveloped into housing in the past, and then applying them to the current parcel inventory. And the analysis that was shared is exactly that. It's preliminary. It is something that was just put out to help understand, put into concrete terms, if you applied the filters, the methodology. We have all of that just to kind of review with everybody, and what comes out on the other end of it. It's really for reference, just to give an understanding. Again, not to talk about specific sites, but which sites sort of fit those qualities, and we're sharing that at this early juncture. And so if there's feelings or thoughts that those, what the outcome on the end is somehow not appropriate, then we need feedback on how we adjust those filters and the priority rankings, right, that we talked about in December. So that's, we just wanted to be able to explain the purpose of the SSI, where we are in the process, and to make sure there's an understanding that, we are not into the specific calculations of capacity at this point. So with that, I'm going to stop, and Ross, you can stop sharing your screen.
Okay. Are there more questions before we go to the public? Commissioner Lambert.
I just have a question of what Jane talked about, and that is the expiring covenants. When you look at that, we talked about this last night, I think it'd be really useful for the non-profit projects to see which ones revert to the city so that they're less in danger if that's the case. So I think it'd be really good to know that.
Yeah, certainly we can get that information.
Thanks.
And a follow-up to that is what else can we do with those covenants? Can we do like a Section 8 with the property owner if it's really, our own version of a Section 8? How do we maintain? Is there any way to maintain these through some additional action we can take?
And Yeah.
I just have a question on the two slides that you just presented. And so on the first slide, you talked about sort of here's what we're not asking you right now. So is June going to be the time then to have the discussions about those more specific items?
Yeah, because at that point we're talking about a draft document, right? That has the table filled out. I mean, we are well ahead. Like we're not there yet. At this point, that's where we're talking about concepts. We're asking about where do we look? Is this distribution the right thing? I mean, we're at the 30,000-foot view at this point, and are these strategies, appropriate, to pursue? Because I think we need that broad direction to, be able to come back with, some kind of system and, details on possible implementation. So
for the folks in the public who have made some very specific recommendations, part of what we're saying tonight is they should kind of hold those. We think they should hold those, and we're going to have a chance to revisit that.
Right. And I think that being said, if people do have feedback is welcome, obviously, on, as people are looking at sites and, they have information that we're not privy to or aware of or what have you, all of that is welcome at this point. But, we just wanted to make sure there was an understanding of where we are in the process, what the purpose of the SSI is.
And just before we head into the public hearing, I want to make sure, commissioners, when I said we were going to run down the chapters, I didn't use the right word. What we're talking about are the key questions on pages 84 and 85 of the PowerPoint. That's what we're going to be running through, which are the questions that staff has asked us to answer for them. At the end, it's section 9 of the PowerPoint, key questions. That's what we're going to run through so that we actually give them structured commentary, and then we'll go back for general comment and conversation. But with that, barring any other questions, yes.
Are you talking about the page that says framing questions on it?
It's a page that says it's the PowerPoint we saw last night.
I don't have it in front of me, so.
So it's key questions, pages 84 and 85. There's slides 84 and 85. For the sake of everyone listening, maybe we can get them up at some point, but where should housing be located? How do we plan to achieve the RHNA? These are the big buckets. What is the role of city-owned property in producing affordable housing? Would it be appropriate to consider more capacity on A-lots and parking lots of religious congregations, support affordable housing production, and with limited resources, which updates to housing programs should be the priority to promote housing stability for existing residents? So we'll run through those. Don't feel, constrained by them, because we're going to come back and talk about whatever we want to talk about. I just want to make sure that we're responding to staff on the questions that they've put to us so that they get the information they've asked for, and then we can give them all the information they haven't asked as we do what we need to do. But with that, why don't we open up the public hearing? I believe we only have 4 callers, so they should each get 3 minutes as they did last night. And they are new callers. They're brand new callers. So welcome.
Okay, we only have 2 of them in the so far, so perhaps the other 2 will pop up later.
Okay.
But should we start with the 2 that we have?
Let's start with the 2 that we have.
All right, caller number 1 is Amy Anderson. Amy, welcome to the meeting. You are now off mute, and you have 3 minutes for comment.
Great. Good evening, commissioners. Amy Anderson, resident of Santa Monica. I want to start by thanking you all for the time and knowledge that you have contributed to the city. I know how hard you all work in general, and particularly around this important housing policy document. I think my own experience with the housing element is that because it gets updated every year, it can really start to feel kind of like a compliance report rather than a policy document. But I think, and I know you know, that now more than ever, given the severe housing crisis we're experiencing, it's really important to recognize that you, the City Council, the Planning Commission have the chance to create real solutions and have meaningful impact with this document. So, I joined the call tonight to just urge you to be bold and to be thoughtful, to both respond to the profound need for more diverse and affordable housing options in our city, but also just to the need for more homes generally. I think to Jing's point about giving guidance on the strategies, I think you should pursue all those strategies. I think what's important around the strategy for looking at inclusionary housing is just to make sure that there is alignment between the amount of inclusionary housing that is being required and the development standards or incentives that make that feasible. I would strongly support more housing and more inclusionary, but there needs to be adjustment in tandem to make sure that those inclusionary requirements are not such that they're just eliminating housing development altogether. Other ideas, I sent you an email this afternoon allowing waivers and concessions from development standards on commercial boulevards to align with the state density bonus program. I think the staff's proposal around ADU incentives is great. Other ideas are maybe taking a look at the unit mix requirements and increasing inclusionary requirements to allow for smaller units. That's a housing option that might be attractive to some in our population. I think we should look at the city-owned properties really closely and make a strong commitment that those sites get redeveloped within this RENA cycle, and that we dedicate at least half of the floor area to affordable housing for any projects that get created on those sites. So thanks again. Yeah, thanks again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Joe.
And please keep up the good work.
And please don't hang up, because I have a question. I'm going to jump in with a question. I see Leslie too. It's nice to at least hear your voice again. So thank you for your very thorough. I mean, it's almost like you knew how to, planning commissioners ought to give recommendations to staff. You've been here before. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more. I think you might have some familiarity with this. How LA's TOC program has evolved, because as I understand it, it is evolving a little bit with the community plans. And is there anything that we should learn from its evolution, successes, lessons learned, that we ought to bear in mind as we give advice to staff at this point?
Yeah. I mean, I think, there was some discussion about it last night. Again, I think part of the success for the TOC program is for, it's producing affordable units, but the requirements are not so high that it's discouraging development altogether, right? Trying to right size it generally. And I think the other thing that's happening through the community plan process in the city of Los Angeles is an attempt to right size by, neighborhood, or, what a developer or a lender might call by market, right? To recognize that different geographies might just be able to bear different requirements. So I think the other important thing to remember about TOC is that it wasn't just about density and affordability. There was also adjustments to parking. And I think those adjustments to parking have also made a really significant difference. It doesn't look like there's been much consideration for making parking adjustments, and we have an opportunity, the city has an opportunity around transit sites to do something different around parking. And that's really impactful, right? Parking is a really expensive component of development.
Thank you. Commissioner Lambert, do you have a question for Ms.
Hi, Amy.
Hello, Commissioner.
I'm not. Are you serious? No, you can hear me, right?
She said, hello, Commissioner, and you said, no, I'm not. So who are you? What have you done with Leslie?
I'm resigning tonight, you guys. Amy, I heard the other day, and I can't remember if it was from you or from someone else, that the LA City has passed an ordinance or whatever measure, I'm not sure what it is, that requires city land to first be considered for affordable housing. Now, I don't know if that's a side and apart from the Surplus Lands Act, or it's something the city just did. You know anything about that?
Yeah, it was a motion. It was a motion that council adopted about a year ago. I think it would be important to look at the details, because the city of Los Angeles does have a kind of elaborate process to determine what is surplus or not, right? So it's not like every city owned. I don't believe that it's every city owned property, right? It's a property that has fallen into a category of not being used for something else.
Not being what?
Sorry, I don't have a.
What did you say?
The category?
She said it's a category that doesn't. Go ahead. You tell her.
Yeah, so really it's the first step is to looking is the city looks at whether the city-owned property is in use as or feasible for like a city-related use, and then if it's not, right, it becomes a surplus property,
Right,
and it's
right.
my understanding is it's those surplus properties, yes, where they've committed that those would be dedicated to affordable housing.
Okay, so that's sort of apart and separate from the State Surplus Lands Act?
I believe so, yes, because this was done before the State Surplus Land Act. No,
Okay.
it was done before more recent changes to the State Surplus Land Act.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Pastor has a question for
I do. Hi, Amy.
former Commissioner Anderson.
Right. Hello, Ms. Anderson, former Commissioner Anderson.
That's right.
So in LA's COC program, there is an allowance for provide ELI units, which is something that Santa Monica had eliminated, with the ability to do that. And I think there's been a lot of questions and discussions about, well, are developers always just going to provide the fewest number of units, and is that something we want? Do you have any thoughts about that based on your experience in both places?
My opinion is that they will always choose the lowest number of units. And that's just basic economics, because the differential between rents on a extremely low income unit versus a very low income unit is nominal by comparison to the difference between affordable unit and the market unit, right? So they're just, yeah.
And so I'm going to put you on the spot, and you can decline to answer. Do you think that Santa Monica should go back to allowing ELI units? Certain situations?
I guess I would just go back to the statement that I made before, right, which is it's important to figure out, right, but to me it doesn't matter whether it's ELI or VLI or frankly just low income, right? The question is really about the percentage and not about the targeting. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Reese.
Well, just to piggyback on that for Amy Anderson. Amy, the policy, I think one of the policy goals of carving out the ELI in Santa Monica was that was a role that was better served by maybe the 100% affordable folks. Mm-hmm. And I know that in some of my projects in the TOC world, you know, with these ELI units that don't have wraparound support. So with that as kind of a backdrop, does it change your opinion on whether we should include those or not?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that that's an important point, right? Is extremely low income people or extremely low income people, and you know, might benefit from additional support, and you know, they also just could be seniors on fixed income. So.
Thank you.
I have one more question, Sean. Sorry. Amy, do you know, and I wouldn't blame you if you don't, whether the TOC affordable units charge state rents or TCAP rents?
I would say Commissioner Reese probably has a better idea of this than me, but I think for the most part, the TOC program is designed to kind of work in tandem with the density bonus program.
That's state.
So it's state, although I think, again, with the 100% affordable housing projects, I think you can do a mix of the state rents and the HUD/TCAC rents.
Thank you.
All right. I think unless Nina or Mario want to get into it, we can go to our next We can go to our next caller.
Okay, caller number 2 is Daniel Friedman. Hello, Daniel. Welcome to the meeting. You're live, and you have 3 minutes for comment.
Thank you. Good afternoon or good evening, commissioners. My name is Daniel Friedman. I'm with the law office of the Jeffer Mangels Butler Mitchell. I'm calling primarily just as a follow-up to the letter that I submitted. I hope you all had a chance to review it. We represent a property owner at 425 Broadway in the downtown transit adjacent zone. We submitted a letter. I know, I definitely realized per the conversation, the planning staff, that this is a general broad level review of the issues, and we're not talking about necessarily the details. But the issue we identified and we were hoping for some action on as part of this housing element is some relief in the code to permit for ground floor residential. So right now in the code, in the downtown specific plan area in particular, you cannot convert commercial, office, retail spaces on the ground floor to residential units. And we know our clients and other clients have expressed frustration with this because, as you know, there's a lot of commercial vacancies right now, and ground floor can be pretty hard to fill with tenants at the moment, and it does lead to something of a blighted condition on a lot of the ground floors of these mixed-use multifamily buildings. We just believe it's an important option that should be looked at. We know from firsthand that our clients could add substantial amount of units in these areas, and it really would not impact the streetscape because, if anything, it would help beautify to provide, outdoor spaces for these tenants and for these units. Again, we realize that this is a specific request, not necessarily the right time now, but to the extent it does inform your perspective on some of the broader strategies and to understand where the opportunity areas are, we hope it helps inform that at the very least. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you again for all your work for the community, and I'm available for any questions should you have any.
Mr. Friedman, Dan, I have a question for you. We do have a policy in Santa Monica that supports the creation of live-work units for artists, and I was wondering whether your request for that kind of consideration was a reflection of your interest in doing that, or because that was somehow not workable for the project you represent?
Yeah, that's obviously a great question. So we've talked about that with our clients, and the concern is that most management companies are not equipped to comply with the requirements for the live work. I don't think there's any real objection to the requirements of live work, but it requires that each tenant essentially have a business license that's registered with the city and that be available for viewing, I believe, upon request by the city. And just these management companies aren't equipped to manage those types of things. They're not really equipped to determine who is the adequate occupant for live work, to check on business licenses on a regular basis. And so it just becomes a problem where in a traditional multifamily building, if they want to convert those spaces, they really don't have the ability to oversee that type of those types of regulations. I hope that helps you understand.
Are you saying, and maybe staff can help us out here, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but are you saying that the legal burden for establishing eligibility to live in one of those units rests with the management company as opposed to the tenant?
I actually don't have I guess that's a good question, which is who would be liable for violating the rule. I believe it would be, in theory, I believe, and staff can probably fill this in, if a tenant took over a unit on a lease without the proper business license, I believe it would be on the owner to rent it out, who would have to then evict the tenant for failure to comply with the municipal code, I believe, but that's just my guess.
All right. Well, maybe we can have staff look into this as a policy question later on. All right. Any other questions for Mr. Friedman? Okay. Thank you. Have we picked up any more callers?
Yes, we have one more.
Okay, great.
So caller number 3 is Tara Brossas. Tara, you're live in the 3 minutes for comments. Welcome.
Okay, great. Hi. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Tara Brossas. I'm the Executive Director of Community Corporation of Santa Monica. We've been participating actively in the housing element working groups, both the preservation and production ones. So we've had a chance to give a lot of our commentary on the more technical side of things already, but I just wanted to bring a few things to your attention, from my practitioner lens as a developer. So, thinking about what do we need in order to help the city meet its RENA objectives. So I guess I'll just go through, my quick list. The first one obviously is, we can't build any affordable housing without financial resources. So I know that's not necessarily the purview of the housing element, but certainly something to consider. And so the city-owned land factor is extremely important. I know there's already one RFP that's for parking structures sort of sitting there waiting, and so the correlation is we also need housing staff to be able to process new projects. We actually have no more projects in our pipeline because there isn't any funding. So again, just want to kind of emphasize how important it is to everybody to also be thinking about that. As far as the suitable sites inventory, I've just taken sort of a preliminary look at it. And I guess, the one thing I would say is that I think there are some opportunities being lost that could be looked at. And I think one of the previous callers said, be bold. And so I certainly would agree with that. And I think in fairness to affirmatively furthering fair housing, you would probably want to broaden, the way you're looking at what sites are suitable. I didn't see a whole lot in certain parts of town, and I think that's sort of the way it's always been based on the zoning of certain neighborhoods. But I think this is an opportunity to address that. So I encourage you all to think about, not just sites that are already zoned, but I know in the conversation yesterday, only 8 of the sites that were identified as suitable were developed. So I think that means it's also an opportunity to look at what sites really are suitable. So it doesn't just have to be sites already zoned. I do think churches, for example, are a real opportunity. Even if they're not appropriately zoned currently, I do, just in my, conversations I've had with a few of them, they are very interested and willing partners. So I encourage you to take a look again at church properties. And then there was a question yesterday about overconcentration, or whether that's a concern. And I guess from my perspective, I want to say I don't think it is. First of all, of course, many of us are producing 100% affordable housing projects, and that's been happening for years, right? And so I think the real key and the real asset that we have in Santa Monica is that it is a high opportunity city with resources. And so by integrating affordable housing into these high affluence, high opportunity neighborhoods, we're already integrating and not over concentrating poverty, say all in,
And thank you. That has been 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. Great. Okay. I only had one other comment, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, I'll ask the first question, which is, would you like to make your other comment?
Sure. I could. The only other thing I wanted to say is I know there's some contemplation of a affordable housing overlay. I think that would be great. We currently already have a lot of by right privileges, so I think the way we could enhance that is to remove parking requirements in general and just allow developers to right size based on the needs of the specific project. And then also, we are leaving density on the table in some of our projects. So, for example, the FAR allows more than we can build because height is a limitation. So I would look again at, where 4 and 5 stories can be tolerated. All of the projects in our pipeline right now are on neighborhood commercial or general commercial properties. So, so those are some of my comments as far as the overlay. So thank you for allowing me to make that final comment.
Stay with us because I think there's a question from Commissioner Reese and then Commissioner Lambert.
Okay.
You're muted, Jim.
I'm sorry. I wanted her to finish her discussion.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Commissioner Lambert?
I have 2 questions, Tara. One, are the concessions you're allowed under AB 1763 ministerial for the with the city?
Yes.
So you don't have to go through us, basically.
Well, as long as they fall within the parameters, which used to be anything 50 units and less, now it's 75. So like our 14th Street project fell under that 75 unit parameter.
The other question I have is broader, and that is, can you give us some idea of how our entitlement process could be further streamlined? And I know it already is pretty streamlined, that would make the cost of your housing less.
I mean, I don't know how much more streamlined it could be. I mean, I have to give a lot of props to the planning team. They really do an amazing job. Where we're getting hung up, and so I'll bring this to your attention, is in a really bad way, is Southern California Edison. And I know that's not under your purview, but it's delayed our 14th Street project for months. It's really a concern. And we've had general problems just, sometimes, and this could be COVID or not, but so I would love to see a little bit more maybe on the back end. That's where we need a little bit more help with inspections, getting our final sign-offs, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Elisa, do you have a question? You're muted.
Yes. Hi, Tara. Lisa. I have two questions. One is, are you able to finance any affordable housing in Santa Monica without city money? Or do all of your funding sources require typically that there's some type of match or some kind of...
Yeah, they don't necessarily require match, but if we have no city money, there are other resources out there at the state level and at the county level, but they're not enough to complete the development financial stack. So I'm trying to do that right now. I'm actually looking at a property and trying to figure out how can I do this without any city money. One of the challenges is that all the other funding sources require permanent supportive housing, at least some component, which we are, happy to do, but we need project-based vouchers, which the city does not have. So we run into sort of that problem that, okay, well, we can't do the permanent supportive housing, so we can't get these other funding sources.
Okay, that's super helpful. And then on the 1763 issue, when we talk about, and it's my understanding that under 1763, what you get sort of for free by right is density, parking, and a height. But if you had to get like a setback waived, or a FAR waived, or a open space waived, would that still be by right?
Yeah, so I don't exactly know, because the project we had that we applied 1763 to already had all the other parameters in place in terms of setback, and we literally just lopped another floor on there.
Okay, so maybe we just need to confer with the staff on that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I have one final question. I'm sorry. Tara, you said that you're having problems getting city vouchers. Is there any reason you can't go to the county for vouchers?
We can. It just requires a lot of work actually to create like an interagency agreement. And I think because there's such limited staff in the housing department, and Jim can answer this better, I think that would be a real challenge. I think it is possible. I just don't know staff capacity-wise if it's possible.
So it boils down to the staff is not there, because otherwise it would be perfectly legal and okay, right?
Yeah. So definitely on my list of things we need is more housing staff.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, do we have our fourth caller or no?
Nope, they have not joined, so we can move on.
Okay, we will move on. That's great. So what I'd like to do now is just see if there are any more questions for staff. And then we will jump into the bottom of we'll jump into slide 84.
Yeah.
I don't see any, well, are these questions for staff?
All
right, so let's go in order. We'll start with Commissioner Fonda Bernardi, who doesn't seem to have any questions, and then we'll go to Commissioner Fresco.
Hi, hold on, let me just find my page.
Okay.
About these overlays. There's all different kinds of overlays. There's ones that we have in the city. There's ones for some levels of affordable and overlays for, I just would like a little clarity so I can understand them. Because I think it sounds like a really great tool that we might be able to do more of if I understood where we were. That's my question.
So your question is about the existing overlays in the
Yeah, it seems like there's 3 different kinds. And is that right? And can you just tell me briefly what they are?
Yeah, we actually don't have that many anymore. We have a few. So I'm not just opening up my zoning map here. So we have the A lot. That's the A lot parking overlay.
No, I mean affordable housing overlays.
Oh, affordable housing overlays. Okay, no, so I'm sorry, I totally misunderstood you. So we don't actually have like an overlay zone for affordable housing. In the context of this discussion, when we looked at other cities and their affordable housing overlay, they are effectively doing the amalgamation of what Santa Monica is doing a lot of already, which is, an administrative process, increased, density and height, and parking rates for 100% affordable housing. Some cities that have jumped into implementing that sort of program, it's because they started at coming, whether they didn't have an inclusionary program before or, they had nothing really to address 100% affordable housing. So it's sort of an overlay. And what we were talking about is in looking at those programs, our assessment for Santa Monica is that there's probably a lot of value in kind of harmonizing, is it a one-size-fits-all across the city? Because right now what it is because the city is so finely grained, in terms of its zoning, we have different standards, almost block-by-block planning, in the city. So right. The increases, go off from that local context.
I just want to interrupt you because I'm realizing I need to fine-tune my question to get at what I want to know. So basically what you're saying is, in some zones, affordable housing can get extra floors. In other zones, as far as I understand it, they can have as much density as they want and as many stories, but not extra height. Is that right? Or
yeah. What might be helpful is, Ross, are you able to pull up the slide from last night with, the blue map? I think it might be easier to explain. So what it is that, so the city has a system that, pretty much in every zone, and you'll see it in the zoning ordinance, if you're doing 100% affordable housing, those kinds of projects are afforded the greatest height and densities pretty much across the city. Then Are they the greatest heights and densities allowed according to the loose, or are they given more than them? So it's always. No, it's according to the loose, right? And then you layer on state density bonus law, this AB 1763 that you've heard about. Here we go. So if you look at this map, what AB 1763 says is that if you're doing 100% affordable housing project and you're in these blue zones, and you can see it covers pretty much the whole city, other than the R1 zones, that in those areas, you get an extra 3 stories on top of, whatever local zoning says. You get unlimited density, and there's no minimum parking requirements.
So you get, 3 stories, but is that in any zone?
Extra 3 stories. So an additional.
In any zone, in R1, in R2?
No.
That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, it's not in the R1 zone because the blue, those standards, that the extra 3 stories, the unlimited density, and the no minimum parking requirements, are only in the blue blob that you see on the map, which largely excludes the R1 neighborhoods.
Well, it doesn't actually. It has some of Sunset Park in there.
Yeah, it's not quite. That's why I said largely, not all. But
well, does it include R1 or doesn't? That's why I'm confused.
There may be some, but not all. Because if you look at like the northern side of the city, like north of Montana, no, that's not included.
But sorry, can I have a clarifying comment for you, Nina, that might be helpful? These blue
No, I understand the blue things. I have a very specific question that I'm trying to ask. In an R1 zone,
it's a priority area.
In an R1 zone that falls in a blue blob, could you build a 5-story affordable housing because 2 stories is allowed and you get 3 more?
No, multi-unit dwellings are not a permitted use in the R1 zone.
So it has to be a permitted use in the zone. Okay,
right.
That's what I've been trying to figure out. Okay, I think I get it. And that's so that AB 763, 17, whatever, that applies to those bubbles. And then in the city, we also have our own things that allow extra density for affordable housing, but that is within the loose. Is that right?
That's right.
And those are the 2 differences. The 2
that's
things.
Right.
Okay, that's what I was trying to distinguish, that I just wasn't nailing. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
All right. Commissioner Lambert, questions?
I have just a couple. Jane, first I want to say that you and your staff have just done an incredible community outreach effort on the housing element. I really want to applaud what you've done. I have a question though. When HRNA comes up with their draft AHPP revisions or whatever, will that also go to a technical committee for review?
So the assumptions, like basically the assumptions underlying that analysis have been reviewed by the working group in tremendous detail, actually, over the course, I think it was like 2.5 meetings. So, in terms of the testing, the sensitivity testing they're doing now, the working group did see these results even before the Planning Commission got them, in terms of the preliminary results, and then the additional testing are just basically variations of that. So we do not have plans to convene the working group again. Initially, given the timeline of this, they were scheduled to meet, basically from December through February, which is what happened. I suppose if something else comes up in the process, and it would be helpful to have that feedback. I think we're open to it, but that's not planned at this moment in time.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering, maybe you can answer how they're dealing, Paul or whomever, with the COVID-related construction costs.
Paul of the HRNA team, would you like to address that?
Yes, I heard COVID, but not the full question, Commissioner.
I was just curious because we all know that construction costs have really gone crazy during COVID because of supply chains, and that's going to affect, I would assume, your inclusionary conclusions. So how are you dealing with that?
Well, in general, as we noted in our presentation package, we're taking the COVID period as a bit of an anomaly. And right. So we're not pegging any of our financial metrics to exactly what's happening today, because we believe, and I think most of our professional colleagues believe, that circumstances are likely to change and may change sooner than we might have thought, given, pervasive vaccine distribution and so forth. Right. So we basically looked at first quarter of 2020 as a key benchmark for many of our metrics, meaning immediately before the pandemic, as the basis for most of the factors that we use. But as Jing indicated, all of the metrics that we're using in our analysis were thoroughly vetted by, I think, 3 different technical working group meetings, including one specifically with the affordable housing developers, 2 consulting architects, an independent cost estimator, and lots of side conversations with various local architects and developers. So we're feeling pretty comfortable about the assumptions, and that hopefully we've corrected some of the concerns that commissioners have had previously.
Thank you so much. I have one more question for Jing. It's just a quick one. Jing, have you looked at the Cambridge AHOD, Affordable Housing Overlay District, and in the course of that, have you discovered, as we all did, that they actually have a $20 million a year housing budget? So they can actually help a lot, the 100% housing projects.
Yeah. I've been reading a lot about that, and I logged into the webinar. I think you did as well, Commissioner Lambert, just to hear about their experiences. So it was very interesting, to hear their perspective on it. And I think what I'll say is I walked away with is, that they were kind of like, just keep it simple. And it sounded like the process they went through. I mean, it was a very extensive one, and there were all kinds of amendments to the final thing, and they were trying to solve for different things as opposed to just, the specific thing of like producing affordable housing. So it was very interesting just to hear their experience, given, a lot of the parallels we see in terms of, the experiences that they're seeing in terms of like land costs,
Right.
housing costs in that city.
Well, the one thing that's not parallel is they have housing.
They do, yeah. Well, we do too, sort of.
Yeah. And it took them 40 public hearings to get to the point of the ordinance. Thank you.
Commissioner Pastor.
A couple questions. So going back to these questions that Nina was asking about 1763. So if I wanted to do a 1763 project in a residential zone, or in a in a residential zone, and I did not meet the setback requirement, and I had to ask for the concession to do that, is that a ministerial approval or not?
It's ministerial.
Under our current code?
Yep. Yeah, we've actually been processing those requests for, I want to say 3 or 4 projects already. I think it's largely been Daylight Plane has been one that has come up. I don't know that setbacks, but there's sort of these, quirks in the code that affect the envelope, or the ability to get the number of units that are necessary. So,
but is it any development standard? I mean, what are the limitations there? And what section of the code is that? Do you know?
It's actually applying the concessions and incentives under state law. So they get up to 4. They can request up to 4. And it's submitted and it's issued ministerially.
And so they're not limited to, I can only have a setback that's 20% less than what?
No, it's not limited in that way, no. Yeah, we use the state law definitions of incentives and concessions and waivers of development standards, so there's not a limit as to what they can ask for.
Okay, so I could build a project in an R1 zone if it's in a transit priority area.
Well, the issue with the R1 is because the use itself is not permitted. So that's not a development standard, that's a land use regulation.
But I could ask for a waiver.
We would have to give that a think. We haven't had that question asked yet, I guess I'll say.
Okay, all right. Okay. So those are totally non-appealable. And then I asked some questions yesterday to Heidi, Heidi, can you just give a verbal summary of what you found out yesterday or today?
Sure. So I can give a brief summary of what we found. The first question had to do with the remedies or penalties for violations of the Santa Monica Municipal Code, prohibition against discrimination based on source of income. So that is, there are actually many avenues that the city can take. The first is that any violation of the municipal code is a misdemeanor, which is punishable by a $500 fine and or 6 months in jail. In addition, Santa Monica Municipal Code Section 428060 provides for civil remedies, injunction, actual damages, statutory damages of $1,000, between $1,000 and $10,000, and recovery of attorney's fees and costs. Pardon?
All right, keep going. I have a question when you're done with this issue.
So there are also remedies under FEHA, which is the state anti-housing discrimination laws. Tenants, can pursue actual and punitive damages, injunctive relief, attorney's fees, and costs, as in Santa Monica. FEHA does not actually have a criminal remedy, as we do for the municipal code violation, or statutory damages, but the Attorney General may file a case for violation of FEHA, and that may end up with a penalty of up to $50,000 for the first violation and up to $100,000 for the second violation.
So if we wanted as a city to say that we wanted even stricter violations or greater fines, could we do that?
I think we do have some flexibility there. There are, as I understand it, there might be some limitations to what the city can do in terms of fines. We can only do misdemeanors, but I think we do have some ability to look at that. I will say I believe the remedies were reviewed in the last 3 or 4 years.
Okay, thank you. And then on the other, yeah.
Yes. So then the other question had to do with what's been happening during COVID with respect to rent debt that has been accumulating and whether or not it may turn into consumer debt. So that was actually developed by state law, and so that's a statewide, it's a state thing. And basically the city, all the tenants within the city have the same protections as tenants across the state, and there's really not much the city can do at this point because the state has occupied the field. We're preempted.
Thank you so much. Super helpful.
Thank you.
All right. Circling back, Mario, last chance.
Whoa.
Oh, Jim. Sorry, Jim. Yep.
R comes after P.
R comes after P.
I want to go back to 1763 staff. I love what I hear about how we're doing these concessions and incentives, let's say ministerial. But one of the things that kind of caught my eyes when we've talked about 1763, we don't really talk about the extra 33 feet that's built into the code by right. It's, as I understand the code and have read the code, it's 3 stories or 33 feet. I assume we're still living by that here in the city too.
Yes, we are. Sorry, I think we just put stories as kind of a short form, but it's understood. It's 3 stories or 33 feet. Yep.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. I want to go back to a comment or a question I raised last night about is 20% of our existing units are seasonal recreational units, and that was defined as either second homes or Airbnbs. And I was thrown off by the air portion of it, because isn't that prohibited in our city? And if we're aware that people are doing that, wouldn't we be enforcing upon them?
So yes, they are. And, as you're aware, the city allows home share, but not vacation rentals. And, that's the seasonal, vacant units could, it's not just potentially vacation rentals. I think the response was just talking about what it might be. It also could be people who are not like full-time residents of Santa Monica, but just, they live somewhere else and Santa Monica is like a second home as well. So, there's that potential population. But yes, to be clear, of course, vacation rentals are not permitted in the city, and, we have an enforcement program for that.
Okay, because I understand. Well, that's a large number of units. So if there are ones that are violating them, we should try to go ahead and take. I don't know that it's that helpful because we seem like we have such a. Wondering if you're aware of the City of LA's recently approved permanent supportive housing ordinance, because it is a series of built-in incentives that allow people to build projects without having to go through CEQA. And it sounds like that's really what you've done for units that are, or projects that are less than 75 units. But I'm just curious if you guys have taken a look at that yet.
No, I haven't, but permanent supportive housing, if it's proposed in Santa Monica, would fall under the definition of like 100% affordable housing anyway. So the process would be the same, would be the administrative process. And I actually do want to clear up the 75 unit limit. That is actually in the zoning code, but in the IZO, because it talks about, any housing project. So there's not a unit limit, that is in place currently. So permanent supportive housing would be, processed the same as 100% affordable. They would have the same advantages.
I also wanted to jump in, this is Rachel, that permanent supportive housing is already exempt from CEQA. There was state legislation that was passed in the last couple of years.
2162. Yeah. Thank you for that clarification, Rachel. Okay. And then do you have any thoughts right now about those expiring covenants, Jing, and what, is this something that, sorry, I see that's upsetting to some. Is there any thoughts on how the city can protect that? I mean, is that something where it's a Section 8 voucher that we could step in as a city and extend that, or this is literally a covenant that said years and it's going to expire, and very little chance that a property owner is going to agree to extend it?
I may ask for maybe Jim Kemper to help weigh in on that. Jim, I'm not sure if you're capturing the question, but this has to do with expiring covenants, deed restricted covenants for affordable units that are not currently, owned or managed by a nonprofit. So it's like the inclusionary units with expiring covenants, and what are options and tools the city has available to address those kinds of units.
And the piece not sure if I heard in context is, are you talking about a 100% inclusionary deed restricted unit, or a project which is a subset?
Yeah, the latter, a unit produced out of the HPP.
And I'm sorry, I've been having some audio problems, so I'm trying things with different headphones. But is the question about whether or not you could attach some project-based vouchers to a few inclusionary units?
No, I think it's in these projects where a covenant is going to expire. Is there any creative solutions that we can come up with to extend those? Not a lot of units, but it would be nice to be able to protect them.
There are creative solutions depending on, usually we look at a particular project itself to see what it is. There are federal, for example, some federally funded ones, when they're reaching their point of expiring covenants, they're actually eligible for a whole set of vouchers called tenant protection vouchers. But it sounds like the discussion here is more focused on what I'm calling inclusionary units. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's a market rate developer said, I'll do one affordable unit. 3 years later, that affordable unit is going to expire. And I'm just curious if there's any hook we can get to incentivize him to continue to have a covenant.
I mean, yes, there is. It's something we would look at. The housing authority is limited. Housing authorities in general are limited. The overall percentage of the vouchers they have that can be project-based, 20%. There are some exceptions. And so, I mean, in general, the short answer to the question is yes. It's tough to answer the question in just a complete generic concept, but yes, if there was an expiring deed restricted unit or units, we would look at different ways to save it.
Okay, well, maybe that's something again, it's only about 100, I think 90 units, not a huge amount, but something that we can try to noodle on while we're doing this housing element.
Yeah, and I think it's something we would have to look more closely at those units and kind of, what the conditions were around the covenants and what have you.
Okay.
To get a better understanding as to possible tools.
Okay. Those are my questions.
Okay. Circling back to Mario. Do you have questions? Last chance. No, you're muted.
I don't have any questions at this time.
Okay, well then you will be the first. Oh, Anissa still has questions?
Sorry, I'm sorry. I have one last question.
Okay.
So the density bonus. So if we're saying that the incentives and concessions for 100% affordable projects are non-discretionary because that's what's required by state law. Does that mean that for a non-100% affordable density bonus project, those incentives are also ministerial? Right, if they are providing the minimum required affordable mix and in percentages as required by the density bonus, doesn't that mean that those incentives and concessions are also ministerial?
Right, so I'll start, and perhaps Heidi might want to also weigh in. So, you know, if we receive a request for incentives and concessions under density bonus law, you know, then we do review that request, and there's a process, you know, under which it gets reviewed, and, you know, the bar is that the concession has to have some, or the incentive or concession has to have some relationship to, you know, needing that concession in order to produce the affordable unit. So that's, you know, we review those on a case-by-case basis as they're requested for non-100% affordable projects.
But that's not consistent with the law, right? The law requires
Right. So what happened in as the state density bonus law kind of evolved is the city started examining its state density bonus law compliance. Where we landed at the end of the 2019 updates because of AB 1763 was the part of that housing package that you all reviewed and that actually ended up being adopted by council in September, incorporated the provisions of AB 1763 as to all districts in the city. So if you are a 100% affordable housing project in any district in the city, all of the concessions and incentives of AB 1763 apply. Currently, however, the way that the code is written, all of the incentives and concessions and waivers of development standards and those procedures, the eligibility for those, if you're not 100% affordable, is for projects that are in residential districts. That is because we are still reviewing, pardon me, we're still reviewing the other remaining projects for commercial districts for compliance with state density bonus law, and will be bringing back a comprehensive program for the commission to review as part of the housing element update to integrate all of the other pieces for commercially zoned properties that are housing projects that aren't 100% affordable.
Right, and I appreciate that because right, we talked about that yesterday, so I appreciate you making that clear. But I'm talking about for a residential zone, if I wanted to come in and put a density bonus project, I think it is weird that we would say, well, if you have a 100% affordable project, your concessions and incentives as required by state law are mandatory, but they're not for a market rate project. And as we're thinking about our recommendations, because first of all, I think that doesn't comply with the law. And second of all, I think that we need some consistency. And okay, so this is comment. Sorry, I'll stop.
No. So yeah, just to clarify. So if you look at 922, chapter 9.22, the procedures for receiving a concession, an incentive, a concession, or a waiver are set forth in 922-080, and those do apply to any project that's eligible for a density bonus. If you are in a residential zone,
they are ministerial then.
Mm-hmm, yes. So if you're in a residential zone and you're eligible for a density bonus, we're going to look at it the same way we would as an AB 1763 project.
Okay, that makes way more sense. Thank you for clarifying. I know it's very confusing.
Okay, let us now jump into slides 84 and 85. If we could have that up on the screen, I think that would be very helpful just for the sake of keeping track. And we're going to start with where should housing be located, which geographic option for distribution of potential housing sites best aligns with Santa Monica's values and also accomplishes the requirement to affirmatively further fair housing? Are there any other concepts that would also meet the requirement to affirmatively further fair housing? And I just want to remind everyone that we are talking about those three options that were put before us yesterday in terms of following the loose as it is, going with the transit-oriented approach, or going with the dispersed approach. So we'll start with Commissioner Fonda Bernardi. What are your thoughts on this question?
Well, a couple of things. I think our loose is actually pretty good because what it does is it pushes the development along the boulevards, which means that in effect people can live pretty complete lives without having to get in their car and drive around and get services. So I think that's a good thing of that part of it. And then I like the idea of oriented around the transit nodes for obvious reasons because they're going to be always active and always going to be highly used. Unfortunately, the real bottleneck in all these things is actually the money, as Tara said, to actually build the affordable housing. Otherwise, you'll have wealthy people buying wealthy and condos and apartments around transit nodes, but then they'll still drive their cars. So, those two things are sort of working at cross purposes. I'm not sure that the value of the dispersal model, I don't see what that actually achieves better than moving people away from social services. So if we're going to build a city, I think we should build it on the boulevards and on the transit nodes.
All right. Commissioner Fresco.
I see it a little differently. I think that deciding where housing goes, be it affordable housing or market rate housing in general, we need more of all of it. And we have to do a much better job of dispersing it around the city in light of our great need for equity on top of everything else that we're trying to achieve. And that was really why I sent you some data from my research about our city's history related to equity. We don't just have a bad record. We have a terrible, terrible record. When we talk about our deep progressive past, we don't actually have one. We have a recent progressive direction. But, I mean, the fact that this city was 96% white until the 1950s is dramatic. And over the summer, I went through census records and I literally mapped the homes listed on census records in the city of Santa Monica of people of color. And there was not a single one in Sunset Park or north of Montana or even mid-Wilshire unless they were a live-in domestic in somebody's home, in some white person's home. And it's just really, really stark. And then when FHA came along and they offered these low interest insured loans that were amortized over 30 years that suddenly made, for the first time and the last time in American history, home ownership costs the same as renting a home. The few people who were living among the people of color in the one part of the city where they were allowed to be left, and we had complete segregation. And I showed you a statistic from 1950 that notes that there were in the Pico neighborhood, which is the area I marked in blue is where the people of color actually lived. I know the boundaries of the Pico neighborhood are a little different in people's minds now, but that blue area had I know that that was from 14th Street to Stewart Street and had 1,961 non-white people. And, but the census tract actually went down to 12th Street. I know there were no non-white people between 14th Street and 12th Street. And so those 171 whites didn't even all live among those. So it was just really extreme. So I really feel a strong imperative that we work much harder to distribute some of this housing into some of those blue and yellow areas. So I'm very supportive of the option B. First of all, as a baseline, I think we should do all of it. But in terms of option B, I think I feel a real imperative to add more emphasis on a boulevard housing approach for Montana Avenue and Ocean Park Boulevard. I see that this list shows a lot of sites that might be available on Wilshire Boulevard if we improve the zoning. And I would like to create opportunities for more housing and make it available to affordable housing on Montana and Ocean Park Boulevard as well. That housing is already permitted there, but I think we need to do things to really make sure that we're incentivizing it in those places. And then I was asking those other questions about the incentives that are available because I've also been looking at our zoning maps and I'm noticing we have cross streets that go clear across the city that are zoned R2. 14th Street, what did I write down? 14th Street, 20th Street, and then 26th Street, which shifts to Cloverfield. And I think those are areas that are already R2. They go through these residential neighborhoods that have been so inaccessible in the past. And that's why I was asking those overlay questions is I'm not sure that at this time increasing the zoning in those areas is the right thing, but there could be an overlay for affordable housing that would make sure that they could get the extra density they need to develop along those areas as well if they could get their hands on suitable sites. And then the last thing, which I know is pretty radical, but I really think that this is the time to start talking about expanding R2 and reducing R1 at least somewhat. I think that there wouldn't be a lot of support for getting rid of R1, which I know there have been cries for from some quarters, but creeping into it a little, just to the north side of Montana, just to the south side of Pico, which were such historically white areas, not just because white people moved there, but because the city legislated it that way. I just think it's really important to take this very seriously and be really aggressive about it. And just as a side note, in our report, staff noted that Berkeley was the first city in California to start having a zoning ordinance, and they created this R1 zone with this protective idea, and protective is like a real dog whistle word in that context. And the guy who did Berkeley, then he went to Palos Verdes, and then he came here to Santa Monica. Same guy, same deal. He held a lot of public meetings. There are newspaper reports of this guy in public meetings with people in north of Montana who are asking him, can we just do race zoning? And he's saying, well, yeah, I think it's a great idea. They did it in Atlanta, Georgia, which was overturned. And we could probably do it here too, but there's a lot of legal pressure on it. And when he said that, what he meant was that group of African Americans we've all been hearing about who tried to open the beach club, they used the new zoning ordinance that wasn't ready to push them out and make it impossible. And there were a lot of African American attorneys associated with that project who were really like watching us very carefully. And that's why we didn't get race zoning specifically in our zoning ordinance, because we were a prime city for that kind of approach because we were so racist. So that's my set of suggestions for location for new housing.
Okay, Commissioner Lambert.
I couldn't possibly say it better than Nina. I think that there are two terms that are being used, and one is the affirmative marketing, and the other is the high resource area. And housing kind of falls in those areas. And for me, the high resource area in Santa Monica is near transit and it's near jobs, and that tends to be the central part of the city. So I would support density on the major boulevards and certainly adjacent to transit, which most of the boulevards are. And I totally agree with Nina about addressing or redressing the past exclusionary zoning practices of the city, which we're still living with, and those of us in R1 are benefiting from. So I would be very supportive of an upzoning effort in the R1 neighborhoods. What that is, I'm not sure. I think that said, though, we have to understand that that is not going to be affordable housing. I think the extent there's densification within reason of R1, it's going to be the missing middle, whatever that means at this point. But it will take the pressure off the rest of the city, and it will provide housing. In terms of Ocean Park Boulevard, I think it's really important to understand that everything except 16th to 18th Street is zoned R. And that residential area, those areas are virtually all rent-controlled units. So I think we have to be really careful about, talking about further densification of the residential parts of Ocean Park Boulevard because we would lose rent-controlled units. And Oak Street, and I say all this because it's my neighborhood, Oak Street has a lot of multifamily, but they tend to be courtyard apartments, particularly the eastern part of Oak Street, which I think we want to protect. And those are also rent-controlled units. So I think when we talk about densifying Sunset Park in particular, we have to recognize the prevalence of rent-controlled housing because it's older in whatever it is we do. I think also in the same vein, we have to, at some point, talk about increasing the off-site radius requirement. I think that off-site housing should be able to be anywhere in the city, with the exception of areas that were historically redlined. So I think that there needs to be that option for developers who are doing off-site housing. So again, I agree with virtually everything Nina said, and I thank her for all the historical data and the complete turnaround in many people's thinking because of that data. So I would support boulevard density and transit-oriented density and a real serious effort to look at upzoning R1. With the understanding that if there's rent-controlled housing, I mean, the multifamily housing in Central Park is all R2, with the exception of R4 down by Lincoln. That if we want to talk about upzoning that, we need to understand that rent-controlled housing could be impacted, and I don't think we want to do that. So that's my position.
Thank you. Commissioner Pastor.
I agree with basically everything Commissioners Lambert and Fresco said, and also really thank Nina for all of your work on this. It's been fascinating and enlightening and depressing. I am also having a hard time because there's part of me that just thinks like, yes, we should be building on corridors and activity centers and like around transit, and that's what we should be doing because it's good planning. But I'm having a hard time squaring that with the desire to further fair housing and to be equitable, and our stated desire to sort of redress some of these issues with the past. And I agree it's not going to be a large contribution to our arena. And I do think there is a very sensitive way that we can do it, because I understand that our single family zones are, something that makes our city special, and we don't want to just destroy them. And so I think that there's a way to do it that helps maintain the beauty and the tranquility and all those good things that we may like about those neighborhoods. I actually do not live in an R1 zone. And to provide people with a choice, but still be equitable. So sort of for the all of the above approach. Thank you.
Yep. Commissioner Reese.
You guys are making it easy for me because I can't disagree with what I've heard from anybody here. I mean, I have worked professionally and focused on trying to put density near transit. So that to me is a number one key. I struggle with this concept of I won't say I struggle with it with social equity, but what's concerning to me is part of this tells me in these transit areas, because they are in these historic red line areas, we should maybe not concentrate 100% affordable in that. But these are the exact people who use transit more than anybody else, as Commissioner Fonda Bernardi mentioned. So I'm torn on whether we should say that those transit areas should be kind of a TOC where it's a mixed income, and that helps address the overconcentration issue. But I think it puts more high-income people near transit who are less likely to use it, unless we really cut the parking there. So very supportive of transit around corridor. I'm sorry, density around transit. Corridors, absolutely, makes tons of sense. I think that maybe what we want to do there is focus 100% affordable projects and say, you get 4 stories. If you're a 100% affordable project, you get your 4 stories. Maybe you need 5. You can put A lots into play if you're a 100% affordable project. The R1 issue is really, I do believe that something needs to be done there. I would question whether we have the political will at this point to do it, but I think it's part of the discussion, and we have to have it. And as planning commissioners, these are all good policies, and we should push these things as hard as we can, and we'll let the city fathers, our city council people, make the final decisions. So I support all of the options. I do not believe we should include any of them. We have way too huge of a number to hit, and we need all the ammunition we can get.
Okay, thank you. It may have been the first time that our mayor and mayor pro tem have been called fathers, but we'll go from there. So I have to say I pretty much agree with everything that has been said by Commissioners Fresco, Lambert, Pastor, and Reese. I do also want to highlight that Commissioner Fonda Bernardi pointed out rightly what Commissioner Reese took up, which was this question of what's happening around transit. And I would note that transit is in flux, right? I mean, transit is in transition in the sense that there are now conversations about potentially free transit around the county. There are conversations about things that would incentivize people to come out of their cars because they're going to get paid, they're going to get charged for moving through a congestion zone. And so I like the idea of reducing parking minimums. We haven't talked about that in general, but I also think that if we're looking out over the next 10 years, we need to put the mobility and the housing conversation together, precisely in the ways that Commissioners Fonda Bernardi and Reese have asked us to do, with respect to that kind of mixed income and discouraging the use of automobiles. I am not convinced that, in fact, residents of affordable housing are most likely to be dependent on transit. We've seen that with the long lives of cars and the low price of gas, we see a lot of people moving off of transit or staying off of transit. And so I think we have a lot of work to do to put housing and mobility together. But I want to go back to something else, which is how we come into this conversation, and it goes to this question of political will. I think we have not been helped by the framing of the conversation around the RHNA. Because if we started a conversation saying we need to have a conversation about our housing element, right? What is our conversation about housing? Then we actually have a number of different conversations. And if we started the conversation about equity, as Commissioner Fresco is inviting us to do, then we would start to ask questions about how we redress 100 years of systemic racism in housing in Santa Monica, right? And we'd start to have a conversation about how we do that. We'd have a conversation about the accumulation of white wealth, to be very direct about it. And we would also recognize that a redress of those very legitimate grievances is not a conversation necessarily about affordable housing. It's a conversation about housing at all levels to enable people of all races and backgrounds to have a chance to live their lives as they see fit, and at some level to catch up with the advantages that have been given to us, a precious few, right? So if we started that conversation and then we backed into it, and oh, by the way, we need to come up with a number of other housing units, that would be a very different conversation. But politically, we were presented with this sort of alarm over the RHNA, and I think that kind of shifted us. So I want to ask the question, what's right? And then I want to acknowledge that we're, teaching to the test. And so we're going to have to come up with these RHNA numbers. But, right, but if we start with the question of what is right, then I think we have to look at the dispersed housing model. And we have to also, following Commissioner Lambert's point, recognize that it is more likely that a dispersed housing model that provides a diversity of housing options, say along the Montana corridor, will create less housing stability risk than putting that same type of housing in a densified Ocean Park or on a densified Pico. We have to have those conversations together so that we don't accidentally create the effects that Commissioner Lambert is talking about and ultimately compound the effects of systemic racism that we're trying to undo. So I tend to agree with my colleagues who've said, let's do it all, right? Let's do really creative mixed income housing around transit. Let's get people out of their cars. Let's build those housing options. I love Mario's description of sort of a complete life that does not require a car. But then let's look at the dispersed option and put those new options, even if they're going to be above moderate rate housing, right? They will serve an important equity purpose that is at the core of our housing element work. Let's not get distracted by the fact that we have the RHNA to meet, right? Let's walk and chew gum at the same time. So that's where I land, but I'm very concerned that we not let the one goal dissuade us from the other. Let's not densify in ways that displace. I do think, and we'll come back to this in section 2, I do want to say we're really complex in our housing rules. Listening to the conversation between Commissioner Pastor and staff about the way we apply the density bonuses, I actually think that our rules are contributing to inequity in our city. It should be much, much, much simpler to build housing. Let's have a good fight over where housing should be built and what kind of housing should be built. But once we've had that fight, let's make it really straightforward to do it so that it's clear and easy to determine what can happen where, for whom, and under what circumstances. The last thing I'll say is I do think we should be looking at those A-lots. I agree with the comments that have been made. Jim brought it up about taking a look at those A-lots again. And I'll just close on this with a discovery that I made in the past week that I shared with Nina, which is that my grandparents and my father and my aunt lived in Santa Monica in 1934 and 1935. I had no idea. Jewish family that had moved to the West Coast because my father had asthma and they needed to be near the, clean air. They moved from New York. They lived in an area which Nina tells us on the map was the area set aside for Jews. And ultimately they did buy a home. They did not buy a home in Santa Monica. And I don't want to speculate as to why, but I'm guessing that they were not welcome here. So this story is personal for many of us. And I'm lucky to be here. When my parents moved into their home that they lived in Santa Monica when I was growing up, the restrictive covenant said no Jews. And of course it was illegal by then, but that doesn't make it, any less hurtful. And I think we need to deal with that. And I think if we're going to actually take seriously the last year of COVID, the last year of final reckoning, not a final, but finally a real reckoning with racial justice, this has to be front of mind for African Americans, for Latinos, for Asian Americans especially this week in light of everything that's happened, for Jewish Americans and for other immigrants. So That's how I'd like to flip the script. We can move on to the next. Yeah, did someone want to say something? Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about the transit-oriented development.
Yeah.
And also IC. None of us talked about IC as housing. And our low-income housing in the city and our housing for people of color is, as I noted in the document I sent you, is always near the garbage dump and the cemetery and the factory. And IC just feels like more of the same to me. And I would be really hesitant to, I definitely wouldn't want to target transit, which in our city with our geography is in those same places. And allowing housing in IC perpetuates those issues and is very troubling and needs to be done really carefully. And on the other hand, how are we ever going to get the rich people out of their cars if we always just let them tuck themselves away, far away from the train? So I think we need to think of both sides when we think about how we incentivize all these locations.
That's a great point. I mean, I think if I can just throw out something, first of all, on the R1 piece, I live across the street from a condo. I live up the street from commercial use. I live a block away from a convalescent hospital and a fast food joint. It's great. I have a terrific neighborhood. I am not impacted by, I am not impacted by that in ways that I feel in any way I'm not suffering in any way. And I lived across the street from a cemetery, and it was really quiet at night, which was good. But I do think there are some ways we could address that. For example, by allowing housing to be a by right use all over the city, but by not permitting affordable housing in the IC. And simply saying, if you want to have housing in the IC, it has to be market rate housing. We should have conversations about those kinds of policy options. Commissioner Passman.
I have some concerns about allowing housing in the IC, and I know we have the IZO, and I think maybe we should look to LA as sort of a little bit of a lesson, which is that they tried to, right, we still need a stable, for lack of a better word, or the one I can think of anyway, of commercial and industrial zoning, right? We still need that in our city, and we're not going to have big distribution warehouses, but we do need industry. And I think that there is enough places that we can either mix commercial and residential, or we can upzone residential and try to maintain and save some of our industry and our commercial zones so it doesn't go away. Because I do know LA has been having a lot of issues with when people are wanting to come in and locate there, they laugh at certain types of zoning. So I think we just need to be very careful about giving away the store. And I think Nina's point is a very good one about let's not repeat that past. So let's tread lightly there.
Yeah, can I just tag onto that? Because I've fought many of these battles in LA about clients who wanted to do stuff in industrial zones and city policy saying you can't do that. And it seems, I think you're very right that we need to protect jobs, but I think jobs are much cleaner than they ever were before. We're not going to have those smokestacks or, we have a concrete factory. We probably won't have another one in the city. But maybe in the IC, the ground floor, there's a certain segment of the ground floor that has to be dedicated to a commercial use with the residential above. And then for the other arguments that Nina made about environmental concerns, maybe you don't focus the affordable there. But I don't want to I don't think we should totally exclude housing anywhere, especially just because we need businesses. And this I will go back to my freeway adjacency stuff as well, because we need land to build housing, and you can use higher MERV filtration systems. You can design projects differently. All my affordable love to be able to build wherever. You're right. There are some funding constraints to it, but there are workarounds for all those issues.
Yeah. I mean, if we're getting into the weeds a little bit, but I would not want to restrict. I would not want to demand that the ground floor be for industrial or commercial uses, because we are starting to see some very interesting urban agriculture plays where you need the roof and the upper floor for some kind of aquaculture. So if we're saying that there has to be a commercial use on the site alongside the housing, that would be cool. I would suggest that we be flexible in how that plays out, recognizing that technology is going to what that looks like.
You're right. And from a professional standpoint, every time that I've been involved with a planning process where we've tried to create specific rules, they never work out the way they never work out the way we want. And you need that you need flexibility, which people hate, because then they don't know, there's no certainty with the flexibility.
Right. Well, Jim, if we can go on to the next one, and you're going to be first up, Jim. How do we plan to arena? Which concepts should be included in the housing element update? And there were a list of 4. I think we're all saying yes to all of them, but maximize inclusionary housing, support for 100% affordable, seek opportunities for affordable housing and existing housing stock, and ADU incentives. So,
right. I can't disagree with all of those. We'll say I think ADUs are going to be less impactful than we hope they will be. As somebody who looked to build one of houses, construction costs right now are so that's with any project. But so I would also say that we need a density bonus in our commercial corridors, one that's very clearly defined and works. I would say we need to look at some things about adaptive reuse and how we can reuse buildings that are currently commercial or industrial and carve them up to residential. I think I worry a little bit about the term maximizing inclusionary housing, because we tried this in downtown Santa Monica. We wanted to maximize inclusionary housing, and we got such a high level that it didn't work. So what I would say is incentivize inclusionary housing. That's what I got for you right now.
All right, Commissioner Pastor.
Yes to all of that. I'm going to just pulling up some of my notes here. I want to kind of be a little bit more specific. I know we are not in the super weeds. Yes to all of that. Amy Anderson sent us a very excellent and helpful email that talks about some of these things. And one of my favorite things she said is you shouldn't just be making inclusionary development feasible, you should incentivize it. And so we need to really, and I think that was part of the problem in downtown from what I can understand. So I think we really need to understand the HRNA study was very helpful, and I think it's the right things. And so let's really understand right-sizing each of the inclusionary programs. I had asked staff to circulate. There was a paper that was put out by UCLA about LA's TOC program, and it had some really interesting findings. And long story short, it basically said depending on the income level and the prices of the neighborhood really impacted the extent to which the TOC program was successful. And so I think that it's important for staff and for us to really look at that and to sort of take some of those lessons into account. I think that we need to be making the development process more clear and really spelled out. So I think that means codifying a on-menu density bonus program, kind of like what LA has, and really understanding, okay, so here's what is allowed by right, here's where it's allowed by right, here are the types of incentives you're allowed to do by right, for both affordable and non-affordable. That conversation about 1763, I think, really showed us that there's a ton of confusion, and there's people who've been confused by the density bonus program for years. Let's make sure that in the downtown area that we are not, right, downtown is different than some of our other, and so let's recognize, that families probably don't want to live downtown, and so we probably don't need a unit mix there that requires 3-bedroom units. And so let's really think about changing reducing the unit mix requirements in places like downtown and potentially Bergamot, where we're not expecting families to live, but we're expecting younger people to live, right? So I think that the efforts to have the unit mix were really, really good. And I think they're really right for certain places, but they're not right for everywhere. So let's think about where that happens. Let's allow off-site affordable to happen across the city, so long, and maybe we do key it to, well, it's not allowed in these redlined areas, not allowed in certain areas that have environmental hazards, and there are lists like they call the EnviroScreen list that you look at. I mean, there are other things. I think that is important. We talked about unit mix. I think we should really look at bringing the option for ELI units back, and let's see if that is an appropriate thing, again, in certain situations and in certain places. And say it again, right? You know, we got to really look at the feasibility. All about the feasibility. And the HRNA study, I think, really highlighted to us that what was a great and laudable goal just didn't exactly work. And then commit to, I love this is another one I love from Amy's, is the commit to redevelop all city-owned properties within the next RENA cycle, dedicating at least 50% floor area to affordable housing. So let's figure out what we need to use our land for. Let's figure out what our future needs in terms of non-residential services are for our city that we need, and then let's commit to putting our money where our mouth is by using those sites for housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you. Just finished my St. Patrick's Day corned beef. Before I start, I looked at one of the pages in the PowerPoint, said that the cost to develop our RENA goals would be $4 billion. And that didn't sound quite right. And maybe the total development cost. So I did some math, and 40% of our affordable units since AHPP passed have been developed in mixed income projects. So if you take that number and you apply it to our RENA very low and low, that leaves you with what's left with 100% projects. We have to accommodate about 2,700 units, and for very low and low. And given the city's average per unit subsidy of $300,000, that would come to only $800 million for our very low and low income 100% affordable projects, which is $800 million we don't have, but it's better than $4 billion. So in terms of inclusionary housing, I pretty much agree with what everybody has said so far. I think we need to bring the extremely low income back. But I agree with Jim that I don't think it's fair to the families to be in a mixed income project, because they really need wraparound support services that they do not get in a mixed income project. So what I would say instead is if you're going to do extremely low income, it can only apply for offsite. And so that income category would be an 100% off-site project, but it would not be allowed on-site for inclusionary housing. I would also ask Paul, and I don't know if this is possible given this contract, to look at the effect, and it may not be that much, of allowing AHPP units to charge tax credit rents. So I know that Sarah made a very compelling argument that she needed to do that to cover operating costs. Now, whether that would result in more units in a mixed income project, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if their rent difference is significant enough to make that difference, but we should look at it. I also believe in pooling off-site obligations. I think that's a very good idea in terms of timing and how it would work and how much it would be. I would leave to staff, but I think that's an excellent idea. I also believe in taking away the radius restriction, that basically an off-site project can be anywhere in Santa Monica with the exception of the areas that are historically redlined. Also, I believe that we should remove minimum parking requirements for all mixed income projects, for all housing projects in general. And I think that is, and then, the density bonus mantra. I really think we need to seriously start implementing the state law on the density bonus program, and that needs to happen as soon as. And that is, oh, there's something else too, and this is not really our purview, but it might be worth mentioning. That is, and Jim may know more about this than I do, of exploring doing an 80-20 multifamily revenue housing bond for Santa Monica, where, I mean, if interest rates go up, that might be a way to more affordably finance mixed income projects, whereas where 80% of the units would be market rate and 20% would be very low income. And that might be a financing option we could offer to mixed income projects that would be more attractive than market financing. And Jim, I haven't worked with that in years. I don't know Jim has. So anyway, those are my ideas.
Thank you. Commissioner Fresco.
Sorry. My dinner came. I kind of organized my thoughts around the 4 strategies that were in the PowerPoint yesterday. So, you know, maximizing inclusionary housing is obviously a goal because that's the only way we're going to get any amount of affordable housing without any money. I don't think I have anything to add to those among us who are more economically minded in this group. The area that, you know, I talked about trying to activate some streets in neighborhoods that are R2 already, but are not necessarily affordable, and maybe there's a way to put an overlay on those, you know, like 14th Street and 20th Street, to try to find new places where new kinds, smaller projects that are more compact or things like that. I don't know. Maybe it will provide opportunities. The big sticking point for me in all of this that I've been ruminating about for weeks is the whole ADU question. I feel like on one hand, it looks like it could be a really great opportunity that, unlike some of the other ideas I've had tonight, would have a lot less impact on certain neighborhoods than others. But the thing that concerns me is that there's not really a guarantee that an ADU is really a home, a separate home for a separate family unit of any kind. Even one who doesn't pay rent, even if it's an adult child or a retired parent or whatever. And I've been trying to think of incentives, and so far I've only been able to come up with disincentives for not doing it, which is maybe not the best path. But one thought I had was, if you're going to build a new home in an R1 district or in any district that is a single unit dwelling with no other units on the parcel, that there should be some sort of affordable housing nexus fee associated with that, so that, you know, the amount of land you're using for your single use is somehow contributing to the other homes that we need in the city. So that was one idea. I'm sure there are a lot of reasons why that would upset a lot of people, but I'm just throwing out things that will upset people tonight. So I had another really crazy, dark idea to share, which would be, if you're going to build an ADU and we create an incentive program of some kind, the FHA people, to get so many people to build those houses in addition to the negative race restrictions they required, also encouraged a model home program, because there were also building standards that were required in order to get those loans. It had to be a house of a certain quality, a certain efficiency, have certain amenities, just like we have for ADUs. So the idea I've heard floating around of a model home that would help, you know, or model plans that would help incentivize and expedite ADU building would be important. And once you build an ADU, we really want to get people to rent them or give them away to people who need homes And so here's my crazy thought. What if you built an ADU, there was another city fee involved that would be waived it would be an annual fee that would be waived every year if the owner submitted documentation that somebody was actually living in there and that it wasn't a rec room or a guest house or a wine cellar or whatever else.
The thing about what I'm understanding about the
Is that one of us speaking?
What was that?
I think that was Jing, who may not realize that she's not muted.
Oh, okay, talking to her family. All right, so basically those were the directions where I was trying to come up with new ideas. That's all I've got to offer.
Okay. Commissioner Fonda Bernardi.
Well, let me start from the bottom and sing the praises of the ADUs. First of all, the ADU program is relatively recent in our city's history. It only got really going when they lifted all these little tiny constraints on it that our city had. Remember, our city had it, you can only do 650 square feet. And then the state took away a lot of those things, took away replacement parking issues, took away some setback issues. So now the skids are really greased for the ADUs. So that's the first thing to consider. The second thing, so I think we haven't yet seen the benefits of the ADUs. We haven't really seen them really hit their stride. Well, the other thing is now the ADU, unlike before, now can be done in any zoning. And I could take, let's say, an 8-unit apartment building and take away 2 spaces of a garage and put in 2 ADUs, even in multifamily housing. Most people who own multifamily housing don't know that they have this little tiny gold mine sitting in their garage in their backyard that is waiting to be developed. The other thing about the ADUs, unlike all these other big projects that we're talking about, it's very democratic. You don't have to be a developer to play the ADU game. Anyone can do that. And that helps both small builders and small owners get a little bit more cash flow. So it's a good program, and I think the state has really made a mistake by undervaluing the ADUs. That's an area where, unfortunately, there's not a lot of control. You can't force a person to an ADU. But I think Nina's idea of incentivizing is good, but anything that incentivizes in a negative way, saying, well, if you don't do this, then you don't get that, is going to defeat the ADU question. I think the ADU is a secret weapon, and I think it's going to look a lot better in the future than we've seen in the past. If you think it's so recent, and I think we've done, 250 ADUs? I don't know how many we've done yet, but anyway, it's definitely a climbing number. The other thing is that, everybody's been singing the praises of inclusionary housing, but you have to realize one thing inclusionary housing does is it raises the cost of housing for a large number of people to subsidize a small number of people. And I think it's an extreme medicine because we don't have any money. Money is the engine that makes this whole thing happen. So we're saying, well, we'll raise the rent for all these people over here so we can lower the rent here. But when we do that, when we raise the rent, we're actually raising the lifestyle requirements for a lot of people. They have to be earning 6-digit incomes. And so I think there's got to be some way of getting around that. And I think support for 100% affordable housing is the way to go. I like Lambert's idea of make it anywhere in the city that you could conglomerate your affordable housing and take full benefit of the extra 3 floors, whatever it is that the benefits are, and really cash in on that. I think there's a lot of value to that. And that might also help people who, let's say we're seeing a lot of these 3-unit buildings because that avoids actually having to build it. I think people would be more willing to go to that 4th, 5th, and 6th unit if they could put it somewhere where they could get certain benefits for that. So that we should streamline that ability to aggregate units from the whole city to build 100% affordable housing projects. And some of those would have the wraparound services that Sean's talking about. That's basically it.
All right. So I just have a few comments. I'm going to go and then we'll go around. I have a few comments myself. So I did a little research after last night's meeting about mass timber and discovered that as of late last year, the California Building Code was scheduled to be updated in January with provisions for mass timber, and I don't know whether that did occur. I could not find documentation of that having happened. It has been updated in the International Business Code, and there is some sensitivity to seismic situations. So I would like, in terms of how we meet the RENA, I would like to encourage staff to actively be engaging with the mass timber community, the prefab community, all of the construction communities that are, and this is not just architects, this is also the producers, to make sure that our building and safety folks are well connected, and that we have the agility as a city to respond to technological innovation in construction, because I think that that's going to be a huge issue over the next decade. I'm also very concerned about rising inflation in the cost of construction materials, and so we need to be sensitive there. Again, we're looking for agility, and maybe this is something that can be done in collaboration with other cities. But we should be agile on this. The truth is that the RENA numbers are upside down. I think for many cities, we are not the only city for whom the above market rate number is less than the combined VLI, ELI, LI numbers, and so we do need to be aware of that. It doesn't absolve us of any of our obligations, but I think that it's going to be important for us to be in very close touch with the state legislature and with other cities as we work to meet these goals, because I will say that I am concerned, as much as I want to build housing, and I want to build more housing for more people because we have a housing crisis. I'm also very much aware that the way that the rules have been set for us, we could do our very best, along with every other city in California, and it might not be good enough, given the economy, given shifts in jobs, housing, given mobility, and we just need to be sensitive to that, and I want to acknowledge that. I share my colleagues' support for all four of these strategies. Like Mario, I'm a big fan of ADUs. I think we need to get creative with them. Like Nina, I think we need to get creative with the incentives. I'm more into carrots than sticks in terms of maybe even helping finance the construction of some of these, particularly if we can get the financing costs down and then have it deed restricted affordable for 15 years. Let's help get those things built and put into the use we need, as opposed to the use a private builder would simply provide for themselves. I think that we should absolutely have a simple and easy to understand affordable housing overlay that goes citywide. I like the SB 899 model for churches and church parking lots, and I think we need to, that's later in the discussion, but I think it's part of hitting our RENA. I would like to endorse, for the record, every single bullet point that Amy Anderson wrote to us, and ask that simply that be added to our list, forwarded to council, because I think Amy put it so well and so effectively that we need to look at everything she said and the way she said it, as well as what she added in her oral comment. I think she gets it, and I want to acknowledge that. When it comes to ELI, I agree. I really like this idea about 100% offsite ELI. My question, and this is my question, is the relationship between ELI construction and PSH construction. Our council has made the policy decision to focus first and foremost on homelessness as the #1 priority in our city. And if I think about a strategy at reducing and preventing homelessness, there is a strategy that involves providing housing for people currently experiencing homelessness and people who are at risk of becoming homeless. And I think there's a space in the ELI housing market and in the PSH housing market. And so if we're looking for kind of creative incentives or creative solutions, what I would like to see is, we need to build probably 1,000 more PSH units in our city, conservatively. We probably need to build twice that for senior housing if we're really being honest about the risk of the COVID displacement for the seniors in our community. We're not going to build it in time, is the truth. And so we're going to have an eviction wave that's coming, and I really feel that, we need to get the input from the Housing Commission as well and from the Rent Board on all of this. But I do think there might be an opportunity to think through the ELI provisions as well as sort of incentives to support PSH construction, maybe as another alongside the ELI as we think about what we would be asking for inclusionary rules. And then I do think we need to rewrite the high-rise rule outside the seismic zones. We need to raise the high-rise limit to 75 outside the seismic. And then, our proposition R defines affordable housing at 100% AMI. Again, I'm trying to find ways to get us to meeting the RHNA goals. We have limitations in Santa Monica Code that limit affordable housing to 80% AMI. I think we should look at raising that limit. We should make our rules consistent. We are not going to go to 120 because Prop R sticks us at 100, and that's in the charter. But I think if we're going to say affordable housing is 100% AMI as defined in the charter, we should make that as consistent as possible across municipal code. Now, there are kind of gradations in Prop R, so we have to attend to that. But I would like to make sure that the affordable housing overlay captures that. And I really liked staff's strategy number 2, which looked at mixing and matching, 80% AMI housing with, higher AMI housing in order to maximize the production on certain sites. And I would be really interested in looking at going up to, 150 or 200% AMI in a building with a requirement that at the minimum, like half that building be below 100%, right? Because I think there's a category of housing that we're not going to capture with above market rate, which is the missing middle rental housing is housing for people who are making between 100 and 200% of our area median income. They don't qualify for affordable housing in Santa Monica, but they cannot afford the housing stock that's otherwise available. And the only way we're going to get that housing created is if we package it alongside other types of housing. And so I would like to see staff think through how we create that kind of housing. And it may be that we create these incentives with our density bonuses that go half and half. The last thing is that we're going to have to find sources of income, and I just want to name that. I don't want to. It hasn't been said. We talked a little bit about the $4 billion or the $800 million that Leslie talked about. We're going to have to find the money somewhere, and I do share the concern of people that we've had significant land value inflation. So if there are strategies that do not dissuade commercial activity in the city, I want to make that 100% clear. Commissioner Pastor, Commissioner Reese made that clear in the previous round. I want to be careful that we do not turn ourselves into a bedroom community. We are a city. We have to have additional sources of income. But if there are ways to identify, to capture value, to do value capture that would allow us to then redirect those funds to the production of affordable housing, again, without dissuading commercial activity in the city, I think we need to look carefully at those options, bearing in mind that every time we impose a tax or a requirement, we do raise rates. So and we do raise marginal costs of things. So, as Commissioner Fonderman already stated, but I think we need to name it. We're not going to hit our arena if we don't find good sources of revenue to produce all the things that we're talking about. And that includes also advocacy at the state level and at the federal level for dollars. So those are my thoughts. I like all four. I like what Amy wrote. I really appreciate what I've heard from colleagues. So
can I just add something to?
Yeah, Jim was in the queue though, so we'll go back to Jim and then we'll go to Leslie. Yeah.
Okay.
You're muted, Jim.
Sorry. I think you mentioned it all. I think you answered my question already, but I did have a question that I would like to direct back to Commissioner Lambert. During your presentation, you said something about, I didn't quite hear it. Did you say cooling centers or something like that? You support the idea?
Cooling.
Cooling. Cooling. That makes a lot more sense, and I'm very supportive of that. Thank you for clarifying that.
I heard the same thing.
And I also want to support, I think Commissioner Lambert and I are saying the same thing on rents, which is state rents are really difficult for affordable housing developers. Now, I refer to them as HUD rents are better. I think a TCAC reference is exactly this, is very similar. But we should look at trying to get away from rents because it hamstrings their operating costs, and we want these things to operate over the long term very well. And we have the ability to write these ordinances. The TOC, cities of LA, TOC could have been written to do HUD rents. They weren't really thinking that far ahead, but when we worked on doing the PSH ordinance, it's all tied to HUD rents. So it's a minor tweak, but every one of my clients thinks it's a good idea. So
totally agree.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lambert, you were next. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to, so I respectfully disagree about including moderate income in the off-site inclusionary scenario. Because if you do that, you deprive some of the units in such a project from tax credits, and that's a major leveraging resource for local money. I think moderate income should be part of the inclusionary theme, but I'm thinking that we could do a height bonus, some kind of density bonus for moderate income units in a mixed income project.
Just to clarify, I wasn't suggesting that it was an inclusionary thing. I was suggesting that it was a different option.
Well, from the standpoint of, I think that we should do a moderate income inclusionary program, and it would be a much higher percentage, obviously, than low income. I don't know what it would be.
But if we had a standalone program, if we do an overlay citywide, right? If we do an overlay citywide, and we're saying if you want to do it fun, if you have an interesting project that you can finance on a parcel, we're gonna. But I wouldn't tie it to private, like inclusionary.
Personally, I don't see any point at all in doing an overlay. We already have an expedited overlay district. We already have height bonuses, density bonuses, streamlining. We have everything Cambridge has. I think there's just like one more level of complication to do an overlay. I think aside from that, I think that we should have a moderate income inclusionary program. Aside and apart from the extreme level, whatever, and that the moderate income should be on site, and whatever percentage it is, I don't know, but I think that's a way to address it.
I would agree with all of that. Couple of things though. If we are going to have a real conversation at R1, which there may be or may not be the will to do, I think that you have to talk about an overlay just because of what is and what's not allowed there. I mean, I think that would be the only reason to have the overlay.
I see.
With moderate income, I would actually like to see us go up to 120. I understand the issues with Prop R, but I don't think everything has to be key to Prop R. I think, to me, like the first thing that's most important is housing the people in the affordable, but then I think it's also this, right, the people who are the missing middle or whatever, right, who make $100,000, but they can't afford to live here, but whatever, they work here, they have a good job here, but they can't afford to live. And Leslie, couldn't you do an 80-20 deal? Like, couldn't you, right, you can do deals where you subdivide them. the airspace parcel.
Well, that's complicated because the project is the security for the bond issue. So I don't know how you could subdivide that and make all that work. I mean, I don't know if that ever happened.
Making them work. I mean, I've seen a bunch of presentations where they've been doing them together.
Bond
so
financing?
We'll get to that. With TTAC, yeah.
Oh, the 4%, you're right. The 4% credits, the bond financing goes to 100% projects. That's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
He was talking about bond financing.
I'm talking about a project that is 80% market and 20% very low. And there's a tax-exempt bond financing program for those projects. I assume it still exists.
Okay.
Right.
Because it's different from what you're talking about.
Right. I think what Elise is talking about is 80% affordable, 20% moderate, up to 120 with an air subdivision. Look, I think that one thing to bear in mind, remember, is that if we're looking at SB 35, right, we are most likely to miss SB 35 on our moderate numbers anyway.
SB 35 or SB 35 is not triggered. It's not triggered by moderate. Moderate, they don't care.
Oh, that's
about
right.
moderate.
Right.
It's only very,
we didn't, but that's where we underproduced in the last cycle. Was in moderate.
They don't care. They don't care.
So
I mean, they care. But there's no sense.
We should care. All right. Should we keep going? Let's keep going. I'm going to bring up the list here. All right. What is the role of the city, of city-owned property in producing affordable housing? We've said this. We've talked about this a little bit, but let's sort of be specific. To what extent should affordable housing be prioritized on all city-owned sites? Is there interest in establishing a minimum number of affordable units for redevelopment on city-owned sites? And should city-owned sites be rezoned to maximize affordable housing potential? We will start with Commissioner Fonda Bernardi.
I said yes to both of those talking points. I would like to take Fifth and Arizona out of the equation entirely, meaning not the entire lot be affordable housing, because we definitely need open space in our downtown, because our downtown is going to be incredibly impacted. I would say on that particular parcel, it should be 75, 80% open, and then the rest of it, you do whatever you want in terms of affordable housing. But other than that, it's all good.
All right, Commissioner.
I think obviously city-owned sites should be affordable housing, because we get so much more for our money if we already have the land, especially land we bought a long time ago, and then we benefit from other sources of funding that are available to 100% affordable housing, and so much more valuable to us. We get so many more units than we would get if we just sold the land and took the money. So it seems pretty obvious to me. And yes, they should be zoned in a way that allows maximum affordable housing.
All right, Commissioner Lambert.
I mean, this is kind of a no-brainer, except it doesn't seem to be happening. Definitely city property should be thought first for affordable housing. And it again goes back to the fact that there's not the staff to do it. We've been sitting on parking structure 3 for over a year. We've had 3 proposals on the shelf for over a year. It's not. I assume it's a staffing issue. Nothing, absolutely zero is happening, other than I think there's now an RFP to tear it down. But I mean, parking structure 3 should be among the highest of our priorities. It's 150 housing units it's not going to produce. I don't agree, with all due respect, that 4th and Arizona should be 75% open space. I think it should be maybe a mixed income housing at any rate. And I think there's some sites, like the one directly next door to the downtown expo station, that except for our crazy commercial requiring a development agreement above 30,000 square feet downtown, that would be a primo, incredibly lucrative site to sell. I don't think it's a site for housing. And right now it's used by 3 cars, one of which is Sheila Fuels, to park and use the expo one. And it's just sitting there, and it's an 84-foot height, and I would imagine the city would make quite a bit of money by selling it. And I think the proceeds from that sale should go for mostly affordable housing. So to the extent a piece of land can be sold and the proceeds for affordable housing production. But again, city land, without question, city land should be and public property. When you look at the people who are most impacted by working here and not being able to live here, education was the number one sector. And the second sector was health. So where is the school district and our hospitals in terms of helping us provide housing for their workers? So I think that where was I going with this?
We need more housing.
I mean, the school district clearly has land, and wouldn't it be great if they actually built some housing for some of their workers because they need it? So I think, again, the DMV side, I mean, there are plenty of public parcels in Santa Monica that should be worked on. But again, it really comes down to staffing. You don't have the staff to do it. So the answer is yes.
Great. Commissioner Pastor.
I agree with everything Leslie just said. I mean, of course, the answers to these things are yes. It's a little bit like, do you want world peace, right? Like, we're not going to say no. And there is some sort of, as Mario is, I mean, I don't necessarily agree about that site, but I think the point Mario raises is a right one, which is we need to assess on a site-by-site basis, right? And there are some sites that it may or may not be appropriate for public housing, and maybe we sell them. So yes, and let's look at them individually.
Commissioner Reese.
I'm going to dub this the Anderson principle, and I am supportive of it. And I do believe we should actually expand this to entities that are not city-owned, like the school district or UCLA, where we zone the property appropriately or allow for that development, and they can come to the table when it becomes appropriate to them. But I've seen some great developments on city parking lots, property in LAUSD. So there's a lot of opportunity out there.
Yeah. Echoing everything everyone has said, I also would like to see a more intensive use for 4th and 5th in Arizona, but I think Commissioner Fonda Bernardi is right about open space. And so I think we need to have, I think we need to make sure that as we're building open space, as we're building housing, we are being intentional about the need for open space to go along with housing, however that open space is provided. And there are important conversations that are happening countywide, like the LA Regional Open Space and Housing Collaborative, where those conversations can happen meaningfully. So again, it goes to Commissioner Pastor's point about doing site-specific analysis. I think we ought to be, the city-owned parking lots, the city-owned parking structures. We can put housing on top of the Main Street parking structure, parking lots, without taking away the parking lots themselves. Because last I checked, we could put a lot of housing on top of parking. It's been done far too long. So that is something that I think we should be doing. The other thing I would add, and this goes to our public sector colleagues, whether they are the school district, the college, the health, right, UCLA, or own a lot of land as well, is I think we need state legislation to make it easier for them to do the things we want them to do, or harder for them not to do the things we want them to do. I'm going to just sort of name that. And I'm an education advocate, but at the moment, state law is such that many of these non-city entities can simply do what they want by not working through our policies. And if there is in fact a statewide housing crisis, then I think it's important that our legislature, our legislative representatives in Sacramento find ways to ensure that all public agencies in California are contributing to the solution, and not saying to the cities in which they operate, yeah, you have a housing crisis, we need whatever it is. So I want to add that piece of legislative advocacy, because I think we could go on for, months on this, but if it doesn't, if it doesn't have teeth from the state, then it's not going to happen. And I think I'll stop there for now. So let us now go to question 4, which is, would it be appropriate to consider more capacity on A lots and parking lots of religious congregations to support affordable housing production? Just for, that feels like a yes or no question. Is there anybody who would like to say no to that? I think I know how Leslie feels also. So do we need to have a conversation about this one? No?
Well, let me just circle back on. It really is the same discussion that you started, Sean, which is basically, can you put housing above existing parking? And that really is a discussion of where do you put the parking for that housing, which would probably be below the existing parking, which is not hard to do. It's another way of saying, even though you're getting the land for free, you're going to have to build a more expensive parking structure because you're going to have 2 levels, the existing level, your new level, and then you build whatever you need above that. But it's a very doable thing. We're doing multi-level parking structures with housing above them all the time. So it definitely fits into our strategy.
And with charging stations, right, Mario?
Charging stations.
And with charging stations.
Absolutely. And any chance we get.
Lots of charging.
Richard Bloom had a bill last year that was signed by the governor that reduces the parking replacement requirement for congregations that do this kind of housing by 50%. So SB 99 would have reduced that even further, but I think we can expect to see parking minimums dropping. And so while we do have to provide some parking, hopefully we can provide a little bit less parking than we normally would.
Do we have an option in our code that you can reduce your parking if you have like a shared parking study? Anybody know? Because maybe that's something that we would want to add in, right? And there's lots of reasons that developers actually don't want to reduce parking.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's not financeable, but I wonder if we want to provide a greater option for people to come in and say, like, look, based on the location, based on the shared use, based on whatever, like, here's evidence that we really can reduce the parking. So if we don't already have that, I would ask.
That's great. I realized there's one thing I wanted to say on the previous one. I disagree with Commissioner Lambert about the downtown metro, the downtown city-owned parking lot next to Metro, only because I believe it is on the table as a potential Samoshell replacement, which would then allow a more thoughtful reimagination of the city, of the Big Blue Bus site, which is something that I think a lot of people have been asking for. And potentially when we regain control of the airport in full, we might have some opportunities to kind of rethink what goes where without detracting from the great park that will go on the airport site. So I do think we're not spot zoning tonight, and hopefully not ever, but I wouldn't rush to sell city sites that can serve important social service and homelessness reduction functions. But it should be considered on a site-by-site basis. All right, last question, and we'll start with Jim on this one. With limited resources, which updates to housing programs should be the priority to promote housing stability for existing residents?
I don't think we're going to be able to say all of them. Or I think this is where we get into these stuff.
Noted to the staff to give us a menu to just say yes. Now we actually have to. It's an open-ended question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have to think about that. I can't answer that.
Okay. Commissioner Pastor.
I mean, I'm still really interested in this nexus of some kind of relocation program for people so we can increase density in places that need it, but not subject anyone to any unfair, eviction or relocation. I don't know if we can really do that with limited resources. I think actually one of the biggest helps is to have more legal services for the people, more landlord-tenant help for people who really need them. And I have to say, I've had the opportunity to work with our city attorney's office, and we, in this city, have a more robust, I think, support for landlord-tenant than other cities that I know of. I'm really impressed by our city resources on that, and I think maybe more of that and really educating people about what their rights are and what their landlords can do and what they can't do. I mean, it's really hard. This one is just so hard. And I loved the idea of, if we have any, we can just give monetary assistance for rental assistance. I know that's kind of a pipe dream, but another one.
Commissioner Lambert.
Well, we actually have that program, Elise. It's called Protecting Our Diversity, Sean? Is that it?
No, I know. I want it to be much, much bigger.
Well, and it's an important but short-term program. And as you know, none of that money, the money that goes to that does not go to housing protection, which doesn't say it shouldn't happen. I think I'm a firm believer in the acquisition and rehab approach, and I know that it can only count toward 25% of our RANA goal, but I look at the Virginia Avenue example that CCSM is doing, and it's protecting tenants with 55-year deed restrictions for affordability. It's not displacing anybody who's not eligible to live there. So as units turn over with non-eligible people, they're then replaced with eligible. In terms of protecting housing security, I think that is a terrific approach. Of course, the problem is there's no money. And so I think we should, and particularly in the case of the Virginia Avenue project, there's actually residual land they can build some new construction on. So that's like the best of both worlds. I think tenant assistance, the legal assistance is critical. I think the POD program serves an important function. I'm not sure how well it's working, but it is important. And again, the acquisition and rehab approach, I think, is a really smart one. So that's me.
Okay, Commissioner Fresco.
Question is like Sophie's choice. It's a really hard one. My first instinct is that the POD program is really important right now because we need to do damage control and make sure we don't have more people who are coming unhoused in this horrible time. In general, Leslie was just talking about acquisition and rehab, and I do love that program because it feeds into my great love for historic preservation. And so I just can't resist that. But honestly, finance and this housing finance, budgeting my grocery list, these things are not my area of expertise, but I would say in general that my priorities would be to focus on making sure that the housing problem doesn't get worse and to, in the short term, focus on low-hanging fruit. So that's kind of what I'm.
Commissioner Fonda Bernardi.
Well, let me feed Commissioner Fresco's love of old buildings by raising the flag for adaptive reuse, which is to start converting some of these commercial buildings, ground floor or otherwise, to residential use. We're looking at square foot rent comparable between commercial buildings and residential buildings. So we're in that feasibility envelope. And the main thing about it is that you're not demolishing any buildings to get new housing. You're just changing the use of a building, which is a natural evolution for most buildings. They survive by changing use, particularly if they're going to go for a long time. So I think that's kind of a natural. It's going to involve some tweaking of our code, which is always good. I think when we start thinking in terms of adaptive reuse in a lot of different directions, it's always better than starting over with a blank piece of paper and gazillions of BTUs of embedded energy that are thrown up in the sky and dumped into a landfill, and then we have to start over. So anything we can do to reuse existing resources is better for us and keeps us from demolishing or displacing tenants. Because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that in the report last night from the city, that many people who have the right of return actually don't return because they get permanently displaced. And I would extend that. I know it's not on our agenda tonight, but I would extend that same disaster to businesses. When businesses are dumped to build, they don't come back. And say goodbye to a lot of great businesses that, Busy Bee, you name them. We all know which ones they are. So the idea of essentially preserving stability is providing stability for everybody by really not demolishing things.
Yeah, I think I'm witnessing that on Pico Boulevard, right, Mario? I mean, it's you see the rents get raised, the long-time business goes out, then something new and trendy comes in, and then they fail because most new small businesses fail, and then you're back to something else. At the end of the day, the old business that was doing more or less fine is gone for good, and that's really sad. So we do need, Leslie talked about this a while ago. We do need to think about that legacy business support structure, and I think I would bring it back in this context. A few years ago, I remember when we were looking at all those projects around Santa Monica and Yale, where I remember plaintively asking if there was any way to kind of, move the Dragon Palace into one of the new buildings while it was getting knocked down, right? Because but the idea being that we need to find ways to preserve those small businesses. I think we need to take a long view. And I think we need to think really carefully about what we can control and what we cannot control under current state law. Now, I'd love to see Ellis reform. I'd love to see vacancy decontrol reform. They do not appear to be happening anytime soon, which means that with the COVID eviction cliff, right, the best solution to the COVID eviction cliff is going to be the kinds of legal support services that Commissioner Pastor talked about, defending people who are at risk of being removed from their homes very aggressively, but defending them. Then I think we need to ask this question about looking out over the next 10 years and the looming homelessness crisis or eviction crisis for the most vulnerably housed people, right? They're in the rent control buildings that are liable to get Ellis. They're in, and they're in deed restricted units that are liable to convert. I think we need to focus in on maximizing our ability to protect those deed restrictions. Let's figure out what the city can buy for $1 and what it can't. But then I think we need to look at universal basic housing subsidy. It is a great use of our money. If we have the resources to expand it with that same eye towards vulnerable, like really precariously housed people, we should do it. But at the same time, what I don't want to do is chase higher rents with higher pod subsidies and create sort of a perverse incentive for those rents to go up because we're going to step in and backfill them. So I'd like to look at some requirements. If we look at slide, I'm looking at slide 72, no, I'm looking at 70. Oh, it's the slide in the 70s. There was this new concept for tax abatement for like pod participants or for certain types of housing. And I think we should pursue that so that what we're doing is we're essentially pairing a pod subsidy with a commitment by that landlord not to raise the rents and not to Ellis the building. And maybe in exchange for that, they also get some sort of an abatement on the other side. I want to prevent the pod subsidy from simply raising rents or accelerating things that we don't want to accelerate. But fundamentally, if we're looking over the next 10 years, we have a growing senior population. We have a precarious senior population. I want to keep them in their homes with subsidies. Look at where else we can keep families in their homes in particular. And then of course, prevent those deconversions or conversions away from deed restricted, and then just fight the Ellis evictions with everything we have. So that's how I would prioritize it.
I mean, that was slide 7, by the way, but also that might be a good incentive for the ADUs, right? Because sort of just circling back on that for a second, because my concern with ADUs has always been like, they may count, but are they really housing people? Right? And so perhaps you guys were having a conversation about incentives, so perhaps that is also really good. A tax rebate, right? If you build an ADU and you restrict it to affordable, you get a tax break, property tax break.
Yeah, that's right. And, there was a comment that came in from someone, I don't remember where it was posted, so forgive me, that credit checks and background checks in Santa Monica have had a history of being more aggressive on people of color and people of lower income. I think that's terrible, and that shouldn't be happening, and we should be enforcing that. At the same time, we have a lot to learn from the county's landlord incentive project, which essentially sets aside some money to provide the security deposit, an emergency phone number, and some other support for landlords who take risks with what they perceive as risk with people exiting homelessness. And I think we should take a look at that program and see if there's a way to set aside a little bit of money to kind of, again, incentivize more use of, so we have the stick, which is enforcement against discrimination, but we also have the carrot, which is, backstopping some of those security deposits and making it financially more feasible for people to move into housing. The last thing I would throw in there, Leslie said it, but I think this needs to be prioritized now and not in 2 years. We have a biennial budget coming up. We need to expand the housing staff. We don't have the FTEs created for the housing staff. None of what we're talking about is going to happen. We're going to be waiting 2 years to get it going, after which the COVID eviction cliff will already have occurred. So if we don't put money into our FTEs in our housing authority now, in June of 2021, we will not be positioned to do all the things that we're talking about. I just can't stress that enough.
Well, let me add, it's not the housing authority, it's the housing
division.
It actually processes housing projects.
Yeah. So it's very important. Okay, we've run through the list. Could I suggest that we kind of go back over our notes and see if there are any additional comments we want to make, we want to throw into the mix? I also want to check in with Jing and find out if we've covered the bases. I'm sure we've given them more than, but
if you've already run through your notes, there's no reason to repeat anything.
Agreed. No, this is only stuff that hasn't been said, but fell through the cracks.
I'll start. I have nothing.
Okay.
I'll go next. I said it, but I'm not sure that people heard it, and that is that we should remove minimum parking requirements citywide.
Agreed. On residential.
Yeah.
Yes? Residential.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else? Nina.
I think when I was talking about disbursement of housing, I don't know if I mentioned or not that I didn't necessarily think that Main Street was a place to incentivize more housing. Did I say that?
No.
You did.
The reason I think that is there's a lot of historic buildings on Main Street, and zoning different from what's there now will cause a lot of heartache from a preservation corner. And we will cause a lot of heartache for the people who try to demolish those buildings, so it's just not a good idea. And just being honest. And also, Ocean Park is one of our restricted, segregated. It wasn't as harshly segregated as the Pico district, but it definitely has shouldered its share of burden and drama, so we can lay off. That's all. That's what I forgot.
Jim, Mario?
I don't have anything to add, but if I understood correctly, what the city was proposing was not rezoning Main Street, but using the parking lots behind the historical front of that street, which is very valuable as the resource.
Main Street, it said to add to Ocean Park, Montana, and Main Street. So if they meant Nielsen Way, they should have said.
Well, those lots act like the A lots in other parts of our city, and so they really could be potentially a very valuable part of the mix. And to be honest, a desirable part of the mix because those people have access to the biggest open space in the world, the Pacific Ocean. So,
if you want to know why they're there, I'll tell you. It's a crazy story.
I'm sure you will. But can I ask a sort of a broad concept question of where we are?
Yeah.
I think we've gone through our questions from the planning staff, but we've also operated on this very high level, gross level, and on very specific requests and very specific tweaks. And we haven't discussed the specific tweaks. Where do those fit in to our process heading toward the city council? I'm talking about the specific tweaks. I think we kind of have consensus on the big stuff, and maybe there are some we haven't really discussed, but the tweak part, how does that get built in? Where does that get added to the mix?
Let me suggest a great question. Let me suggest that we just see if Jim has more comments, and then that's where I wanted to go before we adjourn, which is just to really clarify what our next steps are in terms of plugging in. Does that get at what your question was?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to say. I will say that I'm excited to hear commissioners trying to put affordable housing throughout the city, commercial corridors. I lost a vote 6-1 when I tried to put affordable housing. I said affordable housing on Montana and Maine were important. So I love the fact that I might actually get 3 or 4 votes on that at this point. So anyways, it's been a really good discussion and continuing this process.
Great. I just wanted to say 2 things. One is when we say A-lots, because we've been throwing that term around, I think, and the point about the parking lots on Nielsen Way that used to be the Pacific Electric trolley, I believe, we are, yes, to that point. I think we're talking about all of those adjacent to commercial lots. I don't think, just for staff, I think we were using that term not as a specific term, but as a general term. So by A-lots, we mean adjacent to commercial lots. Is that a fair statement, just to be clear in terms of what we're saying? And then I really do want to stress on all of this, particularly as you saw, we did run out of a little bit of specificity when it came to the housing stability plan. I know this was raised by Ellis, and I hope that he will have independently on another occasion. But it's vital that this go to the Housing Commission and the Rent Board before it goes to council. Absolutely vital, because these pieces all fit together as a whole. And, we may have the perspective on some of the parcel use and the zoning use and how the mobility and commercial fit together, but they have the expertise when it comes to keeping people in their homes. And we absolutely need to make sure that these pieces are fitting together before it goes to council. So with that, let me circle back to Jing and ask, we've got to get to a draft by June. So at what point are we going to be able to plug back in with more specific tweaks and suggestions?
So I would suggest that if you do have, I guess it depends what you sort of think or mean by that. I think we got great direction from you tonight in terms of the sort of broad strategic concepts. we will be back to you at least specifically just on the density bonus system, because that is sort of, it really is a session in unto itself to be able to unpack that for the commission. So we do plan on coming back to you, for a session, probably May or something, before we come back with the draft in June. I would suggest that if the commission does, if you do have thoughts about tweaks, at this point, it may be helpful to just name that for consideration at this moment, because the intent was to get that direction and then, draft the element and be back in June, with essentially like, the implementation of these concepts, like as an idea, and to put that out there. So that would be the time, when you see those details. But if there's any thoughts about how you want to further shape the concepts at this point, that would be helpful feedback to get at this time.
I think it would be, because you told us that this was premature to look at, because you were putting the sites out there and then you were not addressing the questions of capacity, you were not addressing questions of what zoning changes would be required to make them more feasible. I think we need to have an intermediate conversation before a draft housing element comes back to us for discussion. I think we actually need to take that intermediate step where we're looking at those very questions and given an opportunity to give you feedback, directions, recommendations related to those assessments. Because otherwise, I think we could run into a situation where we get to a draft element at the beginning of June and things start to unravel quickly, and we don't have the time to, really be deliberate about it before it goes to council by the end of the month. Because you've got to get it into HCD. So I'd even suggest that we have another special meeting in May if we need to. And if we don't, we could just agendize one of our regulars for it.
Yeah, I think we can definitely think about that. It was, what I tried to frame in the beginning is because there was a lot of discussion happening about like specific sites and, the how you should calculate this or that. And that's not, not really what is necessary at this point, because that's something that, is going to have to be done ultimately with HCD. But in terms of these sort of, planning approaches, like I said, we have good direction, and we will, absorb what the commission shared tonight. And I think we do have, some good direction on concepts, and we can probably look at, having a session before June, a sort of second framework, if you will, to at least share, where we're at that point, which still may or may not have all of those details. This is a tremendous amount of stuff to pull together, which is why we do need to create space for the staff to actually do the work. We've been on a sprint, and, it takes a lot of energy to do this level of consultation and outreach, and also have to prepare the document itself. So I'm just trying to balance, those things.
Yeah, the amount of work you guys have done is like unbelievable. So please know that we still appreciate that. I think part of what Sean is saying is, though, right, we've gotten a bunch of feedback about, well, perhaps the percentages should be this for these different tiers, right? And perhaps, right. And so in order to not for you to come back and say, okay, here's what we come up with, and we don't have a ton of time, right? So at least there can be more input on those things, because I think we are hearing from the public that and the sites is a really, really important aspect. So I think we'd really like to have the time to be able to make those specific recommendations.
Yeah, I imagine as we delve into it, we will probably be, even internally we'll be debating kind of between different options, and that feels like, so I'm not sure about a moment in time as to when that is, but, I think that there will be a natural point where we probably do get to that point, before we sort of catch things, so to speak.
Can I ask a question, Sean?
Yeah.
How is our discussion of last night tonight going to be sent to the city council or portrayed to the city council, or is it going to be in the staff report you prepare? Or I assume that either Sean or Lisa will actually go and talk.
Yeah.
The commission. But will it be in the staff report for the city council?
Yeah, so usually what we've done is the report for council has been written already because it's pretty similar to actually the report you got. And we will have a supplemental attachment, of the Planning Commission's discussion as we have done previously. I think we did it in December actually because the meetings were very close together. And we shared that with the chair just ahead of time. I think with Sean and Lisa actually just to take a look and, for accuracy. And then it was an attachment. So I would assume we would do the same thing. I think we're trying to get the council report, I believe, published this week. It
worked really well. I mean, we didn't even, in fact, when we then gave testimony, I think there was just one item. I don't even remember what it was, but there was only one thing to add. It was literally, we showed up and we said, this plus one other thing.
That answers the question.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Mario?
Because it looks like we have a meeting on the 7th, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying right now, I'm feeling that a lot of people have thrown out ideas and good ideas. And a lot of the ideas, to be honest, I don't understand their leverage and their value and their pluses and minuses. And they might be very small things. Like we had a letter coming in saying, I want ARB not to be involved in a certain size of project. Well, that would be a valuable discussion in terms of streamlining. I'm using that just for the example of the fine-grained detail that we've been throwing out all evening. And maybe we should use the meeting of the 7th just to corral it all and start going through them and saying yes, no, maybe, and just start that process so then we can keep feeding the planning staff. I know they're already overworked and just rushing to meet the next deadline, but at least we're taking advantage of this extra time. And I think in terms of extra time, these 2 days were grueling, but very necessary and very productive. The last 2 days we had, and I think I'd like to keep that momentum.
I think that's a great idea also because the council will be giving direction on the 30th. And if we have an opportunity for a discussion item on the 7th, reflecting on what the council's direction was, we might be in a good position to kind of, as you say, corral that direction into some more actionable recommendations to staff.
Or disagree with it. Or disagree with it.
But I mean, it'll be direction from council. But also, I mean, you raise a good point about streamlining, and I didn't say it earlier, right? We have a number of our streamlining provisions, and a number of you mentioned this, right? The streamlining provisions are currently IZOs. And so there was some discussion about making them permanent. That's a kind of conversation where we could actually go and look at the calendar and see, what's expiring when and kind of wrap our heads around what needs to be extended or preserved or tweaked. ARB piece, I don't know. When is that red line coming back, Jing? Because that does affect housing.
Yeah. I'm going to have to sign off, you guys.
Okay.
I'm going to have to leave.
Okay. We're going to be done in 2 minutes. But
Promise?
Promise.
Hey?
Yeah. Jing, when is the ARB red line coming back?
I think that we are trying to agendize it's not a red line. You would have a discussion first.
Okay.
I think we're looking potentially at April the 21st, but I'm not promising that.
Did we do that discussion on the 7th? The discussion or no?
I don't know. We're not going to be ready for the 7th.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well then, why don't we agendize an appropriately titled housing element discussion item for the 7th? And no staff report required. Can we agree that no staff report would be required for this? This is
okay. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Right. Like what I want to say about that is, if there is new information for us that you want to share with us, by all means. But I don't want to formally ask you to have to prepare for that meeting in a report kind of a way. Right. I don't want to stop you from giving us an update. We might ask, but I don't want it to be a report.
Okay, we got it. Okay.
You got it. And then let us move quickly to the end of our agenda because this is a regular meeting. However, we don't have any written communication and we don't have anybody signed up for public comment. So, with that, let me suggest that we adjourn until April 7th.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Great. I did it in less than 2 minutes. Good night.
I know, it's a record. We're gonna tape this and keep it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
to staff as well.